When Maylene Joe collapsed in the dirt 50 yards from Ethan Cole's ranch house, her torn red silk dress soaked with blood, and her bare feet shredded by Wyoming thornbush, she believed she was dying alone, and that dying free was better than living as property. What she didn't know was that the silent man who found her would stand between her and the devil who bought her, risking everything to protect a stranger who spoke a different language but understood the same desperate need for dignity. This is their story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Maylene's journey travels. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and stay until the end, because what starts as survival becomes something none of them expected. The Wyoming sun had no mercy in late July of 1882, and Maylene Joe had been running since dawn. Her lungs burned. Each breath tasted of dust and blood, the copper tang filling her mouth as she stumbled through another stand of sagebrush that tore fresh holes in what remained of her dress. The red silk, once beautiful, once worth more than she was, hung in strips from her shoulders, dark with sweat and dirt and the evidence of how far she'd come from the locked room in Cheyenne where Victor Hale kept his possessions. She didn't know where she was running to, only what she was running from. Behind her, somewhere in the shimmering heat, men were searching. She'd heard the horses an hour ago, maybe less. Time had stopped meaning anything around the moment her feet started bleeding, when the thin slippers she'd stolen had finally disintegrated and left her stumbling barefoot across ground that seemed designed to punish the desperate. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, rolling grassland broken by rocky outcrops and the occasional twisted juniper. No towns, no people. Nothing but space and sky, and the relentless sun pressing down like a hand determined to crush her into the earth. She'd thought freedom would feel different. Instead, it felt like dying slowly, one burning step at a time. Maylene crested a low rise and stopped, swaying, her vision swimming. Below, perhaps a quarter-mile distant, she saw buildings. A ranch house, weathered gray wood. A barn. Corrals. Actual civilization, or at least the frontier's rough approximation of it. Hope flared in her chest, painful and bright. She took one step down the slope, then another. Her legs gave out on the third step. She fell hard, rolling, unable to stop herself as gravity and exhaustion combined to send her tumbling down the rocky incline. Stones bit into her shoulders, her hip, her face. The world spun, sky, earth, until she finally stopped in a crumpled heap at the bottom, tasting blood and dirt, her body screaming. "Get up," she told herself in Cantonese, the language of her childhood before everything changed. "Get up or die here." Her body didn't respond. She lay there, cheek pressed against hard-packed soil that smelled of minerals and old rain, and watched the ranch house waver in and out of focus. So close. Maybe 50 yards. Might as well be 50 miles for all the strength she had left. The sound of a door opening carried across the distance. Footsteps. Maylene tried to lift her head, managed only to shift her eyes. A figure approached. A man, tall, moving with the easy stride of someone comfortable in his own space. She couldn't make out details, just a silhouette against the brutal sun, growing larger as he came closer. Terror shot through her exhaustion. Another man. Another person who would see only what she was worth, not what she was. She tried to crawl, managed to move perhaps 6 inches before her arms quit. The footsteps stopped. Jesus Christ. The voice was rough, male, American. Not Victor's polished cruelty or the cold professionalism of the men he'd sent to find her. This voice carried genuine shock, the kind that came from stumbling across something unexpected and probably unwanted. Maylene forced her eyes to focus. The man crouched a few feet away, keeping his distance, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. He was maybe 35, 40, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days of beard growth shadowing a face carved by wind and sun. His clothes were work-worn, plain shirt, dark pants, boots covered in the kind of dust that came from actual labor. His eyes, she noticed, were an odd shade of gray-green, like river stones. Those eyes held no hunger, no calculation of value, just wariness, and beneath it, something that might have been concern. "You speak English?" he asked. Maylene stared at him, her mind trying to work through multiple languages while her body concentrated on the simple task of continuing to breathe. English. She knew English. Victor had insisted on it, had hired tutors to polish away her accent until she could perform properly at his social gatherings. A beautiful exotic acquisition who could discuss literature and music while never forgetting she was property. "Please," she managed, the word barely a whisper. "Please, Her voice broke. The rest of whatever she'd meant to say dissolved into a coughing fit that brought fresh blood to her lips. The man's expression shifted. He stood, turned, and for a horrible moment Maylene thought he was leaving her to die. Instead, he walked quickly back to the house and disappeared inside. She lay there, trying to breathe, trying to think. If he brought others, if he sent word to town, Victor would find her. Victor always found what belonged to him. The contracts were legal. She'd signed them herself in San Francisco, desperate and naive, believing she was agreeing to work as a housekeeper, not understanding until too late exactly what kind of service wealthy American men expected from purchased Chinese women. The door opened again. The man returned carrying a canteen and what looked like a folded blanket. He knelt beside her, more cautious than before, and held out the canteen. "Can you drink?" Maylene tried to reach for it. Her hand shook so badly she couldn't grip the leather-wrapped container. The man hesitated, then carefully, moving slowly enough that she could track every motion, lifted her head and brought the canteen to her lips. Water hit her tongue, cool and clean, and the most perfect thing she'd ever tasted. She gulped it desperately, choking, until he pulled it back. "Easy," he said. "Too fast, and you'll just sick it up again." He let her have another small sip, then another, watching her face the way someone might watch a wounded animal, ready to retreat if necessary. When she'd had enough to speak again, Maylene asked, "You send for sheriff?" Something flickered in his expression. "Is that what you want?" The question surprised her. In her experience, men didn't ask what she wanted. They told her what she would do, where she would go, how she would behave. Wanting was a luxury for people who owned themselves. "No," she whispered. "No sheriff. Please." He nodded slowly, processing this. His eyes traveled over her torn dress, her bleeding feet, the bruises she knew were already blooming across her skin. She saw him taking inventory, adding up evidence, reaching conclusions she couldn't guess at. "Someone hurt you," he said. Not a question. Maylene closed her eyes. The word hurt seemed inadequate for Victor Hale's particular brand of ownership, but she had neither the strength nor the vocabulary to explain the complexity of her situation. "I run away," she said instead. Simple truth, in simple words. "They coming after you?" "Yes." Another nod. The man stood, unfolded the blanket, and draped it over her with the kind of matter-of-fact care someone might show a horse gone lame. Nothing personal about it, just basic decency toward a suffering creature. "Can you walk?" he asked. Maylene tried to push herself up. Her arms trembled, held her weight for perhaps 3 seconds, then buckled. She collapsed back to the ground, humiliation burning hotter than the sun. "Guess not." The man studied her for a long moment, clearly working through options. "I'm going to pick you up now. Take you inside. You try to fight me, you're just going to hurt yourself worse. We clear?" She stared at him, trying to understand why he was asking permission, why he was explaining instead of simply doing what he intended regardless of her wishes. "Clear," she whispered. He bent and lifted her with surprising gentleness, one arm under her knees, the other supporting her back. She weighed nothing to him. Months of Victor's control had left her thin, insubstantial. The blanket fell away, but he didn't try to recover it, just carried her toward the house with steady, unhurried steps. Maylene had been carried before. Always it meant violation, ownership, the exercise of power over her powerlessness. This felt different. This felt like rescue, though she barely dared believe such a thing was possible. The ranch house was dim inside, shutters drawn against the afternoon heat. He carried her through a front room furnished with the bare minimum, a table, 2 chairs, a cold stove, and into a smaller bedroom that held a narrow bed and little else. He set her down on the bed carefully, then straightened and backed toward the door. "I'll get water for washing," he said. "Clean cloth. You need anything else immediate?" Maylene shook her head, too overwhelmed to speak. He left, his footsteps receding down a short hallway. She lay there, trying to process what was happening. The room smelled of dust and wood smoke, and a faint scent of leather. The bed beneath her was simple but clean, the mattress stuffed with straw that rustled when she shifted. Sunlight leaked around the edges of the shutters, illuminating dust motes that drifted through the still air. It was quiet. Profoundly, completely quiet. No sounds of Victor's household. The careful footsteps of servants, the ticking of expensive clocks, the rustle of silk and the clink of crystal at dinner parties where she was displayed like artwork. No locked doors or watching eyes or the constant awareness that she existed only as property, valued only for what she could provide. Just silence. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Maylene felt something close to safe. The man returned with the basin of water, clean cloths draped over his arm. He set them on a small table beside the bed, then stood there awkwardly, clearly uncertain about protocol. You need help cleaning up, or you want privacy? The question itself was startling. Privacy. The concept seemed almost foreign. Privacy, she managed. Please. He nodded and turned to leave, pausing at the door. Name's Ethan Cole. This is my land. You're safe here long as you need to be. Then he was gone, pulling the door most of the way closed, but leaving it open enough that she wouldn't feel trapped. Maylene lay still for several minutes, listening to him move around in other parts of the house, waiting for the moment when his kindness would curdle into expectation, when he would return and demand payment for his generosity. That moment didn't come. Eventually, she forced herself to sit up, biting back a cry as every muscle protested. Her reflection in the water basin showed a stranger, face scratched and swollen, lips cracked, hair tangled with leaves and thorns. The elegant woman Victor had crafted from raw material was gone. What remained looked half wild, barely human. She cleaned herself as best she could, wincing as the cloth touched raw wounds. The red silk dress was beyond salvaging. She peeled it off carefully, hissing when fabric stuck to dried blood, until she sat in only her thin undergarments. A soft knock at the door. Yeah? Ethan's voice, carefully neutral. I have no clothes, Maylene said, hating how small her voice sounded. A pause. I'll see what I can find. She heard him moving around, opening what sounded like a trunk or chest. When he returned, he opened the door only wide enough to hand through a folded shirt and a pair of pants. Won't fit right, but it's better than nothing. They're clean. The door closed again before she could respond. Maylene unfolded the clothes carefully. The shirt was flannel, worn soft from many washings, much too large. The pants were canvas work trousers that would never stay up without a belt. But they were clean, like he'd said, and they smelled of soap and sun-dried fabric instead of Victor's expensive cologne. She put them on, rolling the sleeves and cuffs until her hands and feet emerged. The pants threatened to fall down immediately, so she gathered the excess fabric at her waist and held them up with one hand. Another knock. I'm dressed, she called. Ethan entered carrying a piece of rope. He stopped when he saw her, something that might have been amusement flickering across his face. Gonna need this, he said, handing her the rope. For a belt. She took it, managing to thread it through the belt loops and cinch the pants tight enough to stay up. The result was absurd. She looked like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. But it was coverage, and right now that mattered more than dignity. Thank you, she said. Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. You should rest. I'll make food later. I can cook, Maylene said quickly. The words came automatically, trained response to offers of care. Make yourself useful. Prove your value. Never be a burden. You can barely stand. I can cook, she repeated more firmly. Please, I need to do something. She couldn't explain that lying in bed, accepting help without return, made her feel exposed, vulnerable. Victor had taught her that nothing came free, that kindness was just debt accumulation, that accepting too much without repayment meant owing more than she could afford to give. Ethan studied her for a long moment. Kitchen's through there, he finally said, gesturing toward the front room. Do what you want. But you fall down. Don't expect me to feel sorry for you. It wasn't exactly warm, but it also wasn't refusal. Maylene took it as permission. She made her way to the kitchen slowly, hand against the wall for balance. The space was small and sparse. A wood stove, a dry sink, open shelves holding basic supplies. She inventoried what was available. Flour, cornmeal, beans, dried meat, coffee, a jar of molasses, onions, a few withered potatoes. Bachelor food, survival rations. She could work with this. Moving carefully, conserving her limited strength, Maylene started a fire in the stove and set water to boil. Found a pot, added beans she'd soaked in cold water, pieces of dried meat, an onion she chopped despite her shaking hands. Simple food, but it would be hot and filling. While the pot simmered, she mixed cornmeal and water, forming rough cakes she fried in a pan she'd scrubbed clean. The familiar motions settled her, gave her something to focus on besides pain and fear and the gnawing certainty that Victor's men were still searching. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, watching her work with an unreadable expression. "Didn't have to do this," he said. "I know." Maylin flipped a cornmeal cake, concentrating on keeping her hands steady. "I want to." He seemed to accept this, settling into one of the chairs at the small table. She was aware of his presence, his silence, but it didn't feel threatening. Just there. Solid and still as the mountains she could see through the kitchen window. When the food was ready, she served it on mismatched plates, poured coffee into chipped mugs, set one plate in front of him, took the other to the second chair. They ate without speaking. The food was plain but good, better than it had any right to be given the basic ingredients. Maylene forced herself to eat slowly despite her hunger, aware of Ethan watching her from across the table. Finally he spoke. "You got a name?" "Maylene Zhou." "Chinese?" "Yes." She waited for the questions that usually followed. "Where are you from? How did you get here? What are you doing so far from your people?" Questions that assumed she owed explanations, that her presence needed justification. Instead, Ethan just nodded and returned to his food. After they'd eaten, she cleared the plates despite his protest, washed them in water she heated on the stove. Her feet were bleeding again by the time she finished, leaving small marks on the floor she tried unsuccessfully to hide. "Go lie down," Ethan said, not unkindly. "Before you fall down." She wanted to argue, wanted to prove she was useful enough to earn her keep, but her body had reached its limit. She nodded and made her way back to the bedroom, each step a negotiation between will and physical capability. She collapsed onto the bed and was asleep before she could worry about what tomorrow might bring. She woke to darkness and the sound of horses. Terror slammed through her so completely that she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only lie frozen as voices carried through the shuttered windows. "Seen a Chinese woman? Red dress? Probably on foot?" "This is private property." Ethan's voice, flat and hard. "We're not looking for trouble, friend. Just trying to find what belongs to Mr. Hale. She's his property, legally purchased and documented. If you're hiding her, that's theft under territorial law." "Nobody here but me." "You won't mind if we look around then?" A pause. Long enough that Maylene could hear her own heart hammering against her ribs. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "I mind." The quality of the silence changed. Maylene had learned to read such silences in Victor's house. They were the moments before violence, when men sized each other up and calculated costs. "Now look here. You're on my land without invitation. That makes you trespassers. Might want to remember Wyoming's got real clear laws about property rights and what a man can do to protect what's his." "You threatening us?" "I'm informing you. There's a difference." Another silence. Longer this time. Then the sound of horses moving, leather creaking, men muttering among themselves. "Mr. Hale's going to hear about this," one of them called. "You're making a mistake." "Wouldn't be my first." The horses retreated, hoofbeats fading into the distance. Maylene lay rigid in the darkness, waiting for Ethan to come demand explanations, to ask what kind of trouble she'd brought to his doorstep, to recalculate whether she was worth the risk. Instead, she heard him return to the house, his footsteps moving through the front room to what she guessed was his own bedroom. A door closed. Silence settled over the ranch. She didn't sleep again that night. Morning came with pale light filtering through the shutters and the smell of coffee. Maylene rose carefully, testing her body's capacity for movement. Everything hurt, but it was the kind of pain that meant healing rather than active damage. She could function. She found Ethan in the kitchen, standing at the stove with his back to her. He turned when she entered, gestured to a mug on the table. "Coffee's hot." She sat, wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, waited. Ethan poured his own coffee, settled into the other chair, studied her over the rim of his mug. "They'll be back," he said finally. "With more men, probably. Legal papers if they're smart." Maylene nodded. She'd expected this. "You want to tell me what you're running from?" The question was direct but not demanding. She could refuse to answer. His tone made that clear. But he'd protected her last night, had stood between her and Victor's men without knowing why she ran, what she'd done, whether she deserved protection. He'd earned truth. "Victor Hale," she said. "Rich man, lives in Cheyenne. He bought me in San Francisco 2 years ago." Ethan's expression didn't change. "Bought you. Contract for domestic service." She looked down at her coffee, watching steam rise. "I was stupid, desperate. The men who arranged it said I would work as housekeeper, send money home to family. I signed papers I couldn't read properly. When I arrived..." She trailed off, unable to find English words for what Victor's household had actually been. "He hurt you," Ethan said quietly. "He owned me." Simple correction, but it encompassed everything. "The contract is legal. Sheriff in Cheyenne, he knows Victor, takes his money. I tried to report..." She shook her head. "Nobody listens to Chinese woman against American gentleman." Ethan was silent for a long moment, his hands wrapped around his own mug. "You got family back in China?" he asked. "Parents, 2 younger sisters." Maylene felt the familiar ache of that loss. "I send money first year. Then Victor stopped allowing it. Said I owed him too much. Room, board, clothes, training. Everything I earned went to debt I could never repay. That's called slavery, not service." She looked up, startled by the anger in his voice. Not directed at her, at the system, the men who built it, the comfortable cruelty of legal ownership. "Contract says..." "I don't give a damn what the contract says." Ethan set his mug down harder than necessary. "You're a person, not property. No piece of paper changes that." The certainty in his voice shook something loose in Maylene's chest. She'd spent 2 years being told that her signature made her less than human, that her foolish desperation had transformed her into an object to be used and discarded at her owner's whim. Hearing someone state the opposite so flatly, so absolutely, felt like standing in sunlight after years underground. "The men who came last night," she said carefully, "they will come back. Victor doesn't lose things he owns, and you will have trouble for hiding me." Ethan shrugged. "Had trouble before, lived through it." "I should leave. Find somewhere else." "Where?" He met her eyes directly. "You got money? Connections? Anywhere you can go that he won't find you?" She didn't answer. They both knew she had nothing. "You're safe here," Ethan said. "Long as you need to be. I meant what I told those men. This is my land, and I protect what's mine." "I'm not yours," Maylene said quietly. Something that might have been respect crossed his face. "No, you're not." Poor choice of words. "What I meant was, you're under my protection by choice. You want to leave, door's right there. You want to stay, you stay. Simple as that." Nothing about her situation was simple, but Maylene understood what he was offering. Safety without strings, shelter without ownership, time to heal and figure out her next move. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan nodded and stood, moving toward the door. "I got work to do, horses to feed, fences to check. You stay inside today, keep away from windows. Tomorrow we'll figure out a longer plan." He left her sitting there, coffee growing cold in her hands, something fragile and unfamiliar blooming in her chest. It felt dangerously close to hope. The days developed a rhythm. Ethan rose before dawn, did whatever ranching required, returned at midday for food she'd prepared, disappeared again until evening. He was a man of few words and fewer explanations, but his actions spoke clearly enough. He kept his distance, respected her space, asked nothing beyond basic conversation at mealtimes. Maylene made herself useful. It was partly gratitude, partly survival instinct. She needed to prove her value, to earn her continued safety. But it was also something more complicated. The work itself felt healing. Cooking meals from basic ingredients, cleaning spaces that needed care, bringing order to the small chaos of bachelor living. These were things she could control, small victories against the larger uncertainty of her situation. On the third day, she ventured outside while Ethan worked in the barn. The ranch was modest, maybe 100 acres of grazing land, a dozen horses, sturdy but unimpressive buildings that spoke of practical needs rather than wealth. It was nothing like Victor's mansion with its imported furniture and crystal chandeliers. It felt honest in a way Victor's carefully constructed world never had. She was standing in the kitchen garden, mostly weeds now, clearly neglected, when Ethan found her. "Used to have vegetables here," he said, startling her. Before what? "Wife died 3 years back. Childbirth." He said it flatly, stating facts. "Baby too. After that I just stopped bothering with things that didn't matter." Maylene looked at the tangled weeds, the fence that needed mending, the evidence of grief that had calcified into neglect. She understood stopping. She understood the moment when caring became too expensive and numbness felt safer. "I could fix it," she said. "Garden, if you want." Ethan shrugged. "Do what you like. Tools in the barn." He walked away before she could respond, heading toward the corrals where a horse waited for his attention. Maylene found the tools, rusty but serviceable, and started pulling weeds. The work was hard on her still healing hands, dirt packing under her nails, sweat soaking Ethan's too large shirt. But it felt good, purposeful. Every weed pulled was a small act of reclamation, of making something dead come back to life. She worked until the sun was too high, then retreated to the house to prepare midday dinner. When Ethan came in, he looked at her dirty hands, her sweat-stained clothes, her face flushed with exertion. "You overdoing it," he said. "I'm fine." "You're stubborn." "Yes." She set food on the table, beans again, but she'd found wild onions growing near the creek and used them to add flavor. "Stubborn is how I survived this long." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. They ate in companionable silence. On the fifth day, the weather broke. Storm clouds gathered in the afternoon, turning the sky bruise purple. Wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain across the grassland. Ethan came back early, securing shutters and checking the barn roof. "Gonna be a bad one," he said. "You scared of thunder?" Maylene shook her head. "No, just men." The admission surprised them both. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Yeah, men are scarier." The storm hit just after dark. Lightning that turned night into flickering day, thunder that shook the small house, rain that hammered the roof like judgment. Maylene sat at the kitchen table, mending one of Ethan's shirts by lamplight, trying not to flinch at every crack of thunder. Ethan sat across from her, cleaning a rifle with methodical care. The weapon should have frightened her. Victor kept guns, used them as casual threats, but somehow Ethan's handling of it felt different, practical rather than performative. A tool kept ready, not a symbol of power. "Can you shoot?" he asked without looking up. "No?" "Might want to learn. Out here it's a useful skill." "For what?" "Protection." He paused in his cleaning, met her eyes. "I won't always be here. Things happen. You should know how to defend yourself." But the idea of protection as something she could provide for herself rather than something granted by men was so foreign that Maylene couldn't immediately process it. "I don't want to kill anyone," she said quietly. "Neither do I, but wanting and doing are different things when it comes to survival." Lightning flashed, illuminating his face in harsh white light. She saw scars there she hadn't noticed before. A thin line through his eyebrow, another along his jaw. Marks of violence survived. "What happened to your face?" she asked, then immediately regretted the intrusion. But Ethan didn't seem bothered. "Different things. Bar fight when I was young and stupid. Horse kicked me once. This one," he touched the scar through his eyebrow. "That was a man who disagreed with my opinion about property rights." "You won the disagreement?" "I'm alive. He's not. So I guess I won." He said it without satisfaction, just stating facts. Doesn't feel like winning most days. The storm raged outside. Inside, lamplight made the small kitchen feel like a separate world, disconnected from Victor and pursuit, and all the complications waiting beyond these walls. "Why you help me?" Maylene asked. The question had been building for days. You don't know me. I bring you trouble. I have nothing to offer in return." Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, like he was choosing each word with precision. "My wife, Sarah. She came from somewhere else too, Iowa. Her family didn't approve of her marrying a nobody rancher trying to make something from nothing out here. They said terrible things, cut her off completely." He set down the cleaning cloth, looking at the rifle instead of Maylene. She died believing she'd made a mistake, that maybe her family was right and she'd thrown away everything for a man who couldn't even keep her safe through childbirth. Thunder cracked overhead. "I couldn't save her," Ethan continued. "Couldn't protect her from the thing that killed her. But I can—" He trailed off, searching for words. "When I saw you in the dirt, running from something, hurt and scared, I don't know. Maybe helping you is how I apologize to Sarah for failing her. Maybe it's just doing the thing I should have been able to do before. Maybe it doesn't matter why. You needed help. I could provide it," seemed like a simple equation. Maylene felt tears burning behind her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the raw honesty of his confession, the way he'd offered her his grief like it was a fair trade for her trust. "I'm sorry," she said. "About Sarah. About the baby." "Yeah, me too." They sat in silence while the storm continued its assault on the world outside. Finally, Maylene spoke again. "Victor will come himself soon. The men, they will tell him about you. He won't like that someone challenged him. Let him come. He's powerful, rich, connected. He will bring law on his side." "Law isn't always right," Ethan said, "and power isn't always enough when a man's standing on his own land defending what matters to him. I don't want you hurt because of me." He looked up then, meeting her eyes directly. "That's not your choice to make. I decide what risks I take. You decide what you do with the safety those risks buy you. We clear?" She nodded, throat too tight for words. The storm eventually passed, leaving behind the clean smell of rain-washed earth and a silence that felt less empty than it had before. Maylene finished mending Ethan's shirt, her stitches small and neat despite her rough hands. When she handed it to him, he examined her work with the same careful attention he'd given the rifle. "You're good at this," he said. "Victor liked things perfect. I learned." She folded her own hands in her lap, studying the calluses forming where blisters had been. "He would hate seeing me now, dirty, dressed like a boy, working in gardens like a servant." "You are a servant." The words should have stung but didn't, because Ethan said them the way he said everything, as simple fact, without judgment. "I am a person who does service," Maylene corrected carefully. "Not same thing." "No," Ethan agreed. "Not the same thing at all." He stood, stretched, moved toward his bedroom. At the door he paused. "Sleep well, Maylene Joe?" "Sleep well, Ethan Cole." It had become their ritual. These simple wishes, acknowledge humanity, mutual recognition that the other existed and mattered. Maylene sat alone in the kitchen after he'd gone, listening to the house settle, feeling something unknot in her chest that had been twisted tight since San Francisco. She wasn't free yet. Victor was still out there, still hunting, still legally entitled to reclaim his property. The danger hadn't passed, but for the first time in 2 years she had an ally. Someone who saw her as human first, complication second. Someone who asked her opinion instead of giving orders. Someone who offered protection without demanding payment. It wasn't freedom, but it was a foundation on which freedom might be built. And for now, in this small house on this lonely Wyoming ranch, that was enough. A week passed, then another. Maylene's wounds healed, her feet toughened. She learned the rhythms of ranch life. When Ethan rose, when he returned, what work needed doing. The garden came back to life under her care, yielding wild greens and a few struggling vegetables. She found ways to make their plain food interesting, using techniques her mother had taught her combined with frontier ingredients. Ethan taught her to shoot. It started casually. He set up bottles on a fence post one afternoon and handed her an old revolver, showing her how to hold it, where to aim, how to absorb the recoil. "Don't think," he said. "Just breathe and squeeze." The first shot went wide. So did the second and third. By the 10th attempt, her arm ached and her ears rang despite Ethan's warning to cover them. But the 11th shot shattered a bottle. The sound of breaking glass was the most satisfying thing she'd heard in years. Again, Ethan said. She practiced until her hands shook too badly to hold the weapon steady. Ethan took it back, cleaned it, showed her how to load and unload safely. You're a natural, he said, and she could tell he meant it. I had good teacher. Had nothing to do with it. You've got steady hands and you don't panic. That's all shooting is, staying calm when everything says to run. Maylene thought about running through thorn bushes, about collapsing in the dirt 50 yards from rescue, about the moment she'd decided dying free was better than living as property. I'm good at not panicking, she said. Yeah. Ethan's expression was understanding. I noticed. They walked back to the house as the sun set, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too beautiful for a world containing men like Victor Hale. He's going to come, Maylene said quietly. Victor, soon. I know. What will you do? Ethan was quiet for several steps. Whatever needs doing. It wasn't a satisfying answer, but it was an honest one. Maylene accepted it. That night she cooked something special, dumplings made from flour and water and wild greens shaped carefully despite the lack of proper tools. They weren't perfect, but they were edible, and they reminded her of home in a way that made her chest ache. Ethan tried one, chewed thoughtfully, tried another. What are these? Jiaozi. Chinese dumplings. My mother taught me when I was small. They're good. He ate 3 more, watching her across the table. You miss her? Your mother? Every day. Maylene folded her hands in her lap, fighting the urge to cry. I write letters I cannot send. Tell her about this, about you, about being safe for the first time since leaving China. You could send them, Ethan said. I go to town sometimes, could post letters for you. The offer was simple but profound. Connection to her family, to the people she'd sacrificed everything to help, and then lost contact with entirely. Victor might intercept them, she said. Victor's in Cheyenne. Town I use is 30 miles opposite direction. He'd have to be watching every post office in Wyoming to catch your letters. Hope flared, dangerous and bright. You would do this? She asked. Why wouldn't I? Because men like Victor had taught her that kindness was always transactional, that every gift came with invisible strings, that protection was just another word for ownership. But Ethan wasn't like Victor. She was learning that slowly, letting the truth of it sink past her defenses. Thank you, she whispered. He shrugged, uncomfortable as always with gratitude. Write your letters. I'll take them next time I go for supplies. That night, Maylene sat by lamplight and composed a letter to her mother in characters Ethan wouldn't be able to read, telling her about Wyoming and thorn bushes and a man who protected strangers without asking for payment. She told her about gardens coming back to life and learning to shoot bottles off fence posts. She told her she was alive and safe, and for the first time in 2 years, she told her the truth without fear of punishment. She folded the letter carefully, addressed it in English, left it on the kitchen table. In the morning, it was gone, taken by Ethan on his trip to town, carried into the world like a message in a bottle, hoping to reach shore. Maylene stood in the kitchen garden, pulling weeds that threatened her vegetables, and let herself believe in the possibility of connection, of family, of a future beyond survival. She was still believing when she heard the horses. Multiple riders this time, coming fast. She dropped her tools and ran for the house. Maylene reached the house before the riders crested the hill, her heart slamming against her ribs hard enough to hurt. She burst through the door and found Ethan already at the window, rifle in hand, watching the horizon with the stillness of a man who'd done this before. How many? She asked, breathless. 6, maybe 7. His voice was level, matter-of-fact. One's hanging back, probably Victor. The name hit her like a fist. She'd known this moment would come, had prepared herself mentally for it every day since arriving. But preparation didn't stop the fear that flooded through her now, cold and paralyzing. He brought too many, she whispered. You can't. Get the pistol I gave you, Ethan interrupted, not looking away from the window. Load it like I showed you. Then go to the bedroom and stay there unless I call for you. Ethan, now Maylene. The command in his voice moved her when fear wouldn't. She grabbed the revolver from where she'd hidden it under her mattress, checked the cylinder with shaking hands, confirmed all 6 chambers were loaded. The weight of it felt different now than it had during target practice. heavier, more real, a promise of violence she wasn't sure she could keep. She positioned herself in the bedroom doorway where she could see into the front room but stay mostly hidden. Through the window, she watched the riders approach, spreading out as they came, surrounding the house in a loose semicircle. Professional. Planned. Victor had learned from his men's first failure. The riders stopped about 30 yards out, close enough to talk, far enough to avoid easy shooting. 5 of them were hired muscle, hard men with weathered faces and guns worn easy on their hips. But it was the 6th man who held Maylene's attention, freezing her blood. Victor Hale sat his horse like he sat everything, with the casual authority of someone who'd never been told no in any way that mattered. He was handsome in the way money made men handsome, with carefully trimmed hair and expensive clothes that looked absurd this far from civilization. His face was smooth, unmarked by the kind of work that scarred men like Ethan. Clean hands, soft life, cruel eyes. "Mr. Cole," Victor called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. Educated accent, Eastern money. "I believe we need to have a conversation." Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle held loosely but ready. Maylene could see the calculation in his posture, where to shoot first if it came to that, which man posed the greatest threat, how to use the porch railing for cover. "Already told your men," Ethan said. "Nothing here concerns you." "I think we both know that's not true." Victor smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "You have something that belongs to me. I'd like it back." "She's not an it, and she doesn't belong to you." "The territorial courts would disagree. I have legal contracts properly witnessed and filed. Miss Joe entered into an agreement of service, which she has violated by running away. That makes her a thief of her own labor, and you an accessory to that theft." Maylene watched Ethan's hands tighten fractionally on the rifle. "That's a real interesting interpretation of law," he said. "It's the correct interpretation. I don't expect a rancher to understand the finer points of contract law, but I assure you, my lawyers do." Victor shifted in his saddle, still smiling that cold smile. "I'm a reasonable man, Mr. Cole. I don't want trouble. I just want what's mine. Return Miss Joe to me now, and I'll forget about the inconvenience you've caused. You have my word." "Your word worth anything?" "In Cheyenne, it's worth quite a lot." "This ain't Cheyenne." Victor's smile thinned. "No. It's the middle of nowhere, which makes what happens here largely a matter of who tells the story afterward." He gestured at his men. "I have 5 witnesses who will testify that you refused to return stolen property and threatened violence when I attempted to reclaim it. What do you have? A failing ranch and a reputation for being difficult. I've got facts on my side. Facts are whatever the courts decide they are. And the courts know me, Mr. Cole. They know my contributions to the territory, my standing in the community, my absolute reliability as a witness." Victor leaned forward slightly. "You're nobody. A widower rancher barely making ends meet. Who do you think they'll believe?" Maylene felt something twist in her chest, watching Ethan stand alone against this, knowing Victor was probably right. Money talked. Always had. Men like Ethan, honest and hardworking and decent, lost to men like Victor who understood that power was more important than truth. "Maybe you're right," Ethan said quietly. "Maybe the courts would side with you, but we're not in court right now, are we? We're on my land. And Wyoming law is real clear about what happens when armed men surround a man's home making threats. I'm making offers, not threats. 6 armed riders show up at a man's house demanding he hand over a woman under his protection. That's a threat where I come from." One of Victor's men shifted, hand moving toward his gun. Ethan's rifle swung slightly, just enough to track the movement. The man froze. "Careful," Ethan said. "Be real unfortunate if somebody got nervous and started something they couldn't finish." Victor raised a hand, stopping his man. "Let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can reach an understanding here." His voice was smooth, reasonable, the tone of someone negotiating a business transaction. "Name your price, Mr. Cole. What's it worth to you to avoid this unpleasantness? I'm prepared to be generous." "She's not for sale." "Everything's for sale. It's just a matter of finding the right number." Victor studied Ethan with the kind of assessment Maylene had seen him use when evaluating livestock. $500. That's more than this ranch is worth. Take it, and I forget this ever happened." The offer hung in the air between them. Maylene knew what $500 meant out here. A fortune, enough to transform a struggling ranch into something sustainable, enough to buy silence and cooperation from almost anyone. Ethan didn't hesitate. No. 1,000 then. That's my final offer. More money than you'll see in 5 years of ranching. Could offer me 10,000. Answer's the same. Victor's facade of reasonableness cracked slightly. You're being a fool. I will have her back, Mr. Cole. Today, or next week, or next month. The law is on my side. You can't protect her forever. Don't need forever, just need today. And tomorrow? And the day after? Victor's voice hardened. I can wait. I can file complaints with the territorial marshal. I can make your life difficult in ways you haven't imagined. Or you can be smart, take my money, and walk away from a problem that isn't yours. It became mine when she showed up half dead in my yard. She's Chinese, for Christ's sake, not even a citizen. She has no rights under territorial law. You're risking everything for a woman who legally isn't even a person in the eyes of the state. Maylene flinched at the casual cruelty of it, the matter-of-fact way Victor reduced her to nothing. But Ethan's voice, when he spoke, was colder than she'd ever heard it. Get off my land. Victor's expression went flat, all pretense of civility dropping away. This was the face Maylene knew, the one he showed when his will was challenged, when something he owned tried to escape. I'll give you 3 days, Victor said. 3 days to reconsider. After that, I'm going to the territorial marshal with theft charges and a formal complaint. You'll be arrested, Mr. Cole. Your property will be seized to cover court costs, and Miss Joe will be returned to me regardless. He turned his horse, then paused. Oh, and just so we're clear, when I do get her back, and I will, I'll make sure she understands exactly what running away costs. Not just for her, but for anyone foolish enough to help her. The threat was clear, specific, the kind of promise Victor always kept. Ethan's rifle came up, not quite pointing at Victor, but close enough to make the intent clear. You've got about 5 seconds before I decide you're trespassing with hostile intent. Victor laughed, but there was no humor in it. You won't shoot. You're not that stupid. 3 seconds. You'd hang for it. 2. Victor kicked his horse into motion, his men following. But as they rode away, he called back. 3 days, Mr. Cole. Think carefully about what matters more, your pride or your survival. They watched until the riders disappeared over the rise. Only then did Ethan lower the rifle, his hand steady despite the tension in his shoulders. He turned and found Maylene in the doorway, the pistol hanging loose in her grip. You okay? He asked. She wasn't, not even close, but she nodded anyway. Ethan came inside, set the rifle against the wall, took the pistol from her trembling hands. Sit down before you fall down. She made it to a chair before her legs gave out. The fear she'd been holding back crashed through her, leaving her shaking so hard her teeth rattled. I should leave, she said when she could speak. Tonight. He will destroy you if I stay. Where would you go? I don't know. Anywhere. It doesn't matter. She looked up at him, desperate. You heard him. He has law, money, power. You have nothing. This is not your fight. Ethan pulled out the other chair, sat down heavily. Yeah, it is. Why? I'm nobody. Nothing. Like he said, not even citizen. Not worth this. You really believe that? His voice was quiet but intense. That you're worth nothing? I believe what is true. I signed contract. I broke it. Under American law, that makes me thief. Under American law, you can't own people. Hasn't been legal for near 20 years now. Ethan leaned forward. I'm not a smart man, Maylene. Didn't have much schooling. But I know the difference between service and slavery, and what Victor had you doing wasn't service. Contract says, I don't care what the contract says. The outburst surprised them both. Ethan took a breath, steadied himself. Sorry, but no, I really don't care. You can write whatever you want on paper, but that doesn't make it right. Doesn't make it legal. And it sure as hell doesn't make me willing to hand you over to a man who treats you like property. Maylene felt tears burning behind her eyes. He will ruin you. Maybe, but I'll still be able to look at myself in a mirror. Ethan stood, moved to the window, stared out at the empty land. When Sarah died, I stopped caring about much of anything. Just went through motions, surviving instead of living. This ranch, This life? It was all just time passing until I could join her. He turned back to face Maylene. Then you showed up, half dead and terrified, and something in me woke up again. Decided it cared. Maybe that's selfish. Maybe I'm protecting you because it gives me purpose. But I don't think that changes the fact that it's the right thing to do. There is no right thing, Maylene said bitterly. Only what is legal and what is not. You really believe that? After everything you've been through, you think law and right are the same thing? She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because she did believe it, had been taught to believe it by Victor and the system that supported him. By every moment she'd tried to find help and been turned away. 3 days, Ethan said. We've got 3 days before Victor makes his move. That's time to think, to plan. Plan what? He has already won. Not yet he hasn't. Ethan's jaw set in a stubborn line she was learning to recognize. We've got options, just need to figure out what they are. That night, neither of them slept much. Maylene lay in the narrow bed, listening to Ethan move through the house, checking windows, loading weapons, preparing for a siege that might not come for days but felt imminent. She understood his restlessness. Her mind wouldn't quiet either, running through scenarios that all ended the same way. With her back in Victor's house, with Ethan in jail, or worse, with everything she'd gained in these brief weeks of safety stripped away. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time. Can't sleep either? He asked, without looking up. She shook her head, poured herself coffee from the pot he'd kept warm. The kitchen was lit by a single lamp casting shadows that made everything feel smaller, more confined. Tell me about Sarah, she said. Ethan's hand stilled on the rifle. Why? Because I want to know, because you loved her, because... Maylene struggled to find the right words. Because I want to understand what it looks like when someone chooses love instead of safety. He was quiet for a long time, his eyes distant. Finally, he spoke. Met her in Laramie. I was buying supplies. She was visiting a friend. She dropped a package. I picked it up. We got to talking. His mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. She was so far out of my league it wasn't even funny. Educated, well-spoken, from a good family. I was a nobody trying to build something from nothing out here. But she chose you, Maylene said. Yeah, she chose me. Her family was furious, said she was throwing her life away on a man with no prospects, no education, nothing to offer but hard work and an uncertain future. Ethan set down the cleaning cloth. They were right, turned out. I couldn't give her the life she deserved, couldn't even keep her alive when it mattered. That's not fair. Childbirth kills many women. Is not your fault. Head knows that. Heart's slower to learn. He looked at Maylene directly. Point is, Sarah chose love over safety, chose me over everything her family could provide. And even though it ended badly, she never regretted it. Told me so right before she died. Said she'd rather have 3 years of real living with me than a lifetime of being comfortable and dead inside. Maylene absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. You think I should stay. Risk everything. Choose what? Freedom that might not even be real. I think you should choose what you can live with, what you can look back on without hating yourself. Ethan picked up the rifle again, his movements automatic. You want to run? I'll help you. Give you money, supplies, whatever you need. You want to fight? I'll fight beside you, but you need to decide what you're willing to risk for the chance at something better. And if I fail, if we both lose, then at least we lose standing up instead of on our knees. The words settled between them, simple and heavy. Maylene thought about her mother's letters still waiting to be sent, about the garden she'd brought back to life, about learning to shoot bottles off fence posts and cook meals from nothing and exist as something more than decoration in a rich man's house, about Ethan's quiet respect, the way he asked instead of commanded, offered instead of demanded, about the possibility that freedom wasn't just absence of chains but presence of choice. I want to fight, she said quietly. I don't know how, but I want to try. Ethan nodded. Then we'll figure it out together. The next day he rode to town. Maylene wanted to go with him, but he refused, said it was too dangerous, that Victor's men might be watching. She spent the hours he was gone working in the garden, using physical labor to quiet her mind, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. He returned just before sunset, his saddlebags heavy with supplies and something else, a tension in his shoulders that said the trip hadn't gone well. "What happened?" Maylene asked as he unsaddled his horse. "Talked to the sheriff. Man named Carson. Told him about Victor, about the situation." Ethan's mouth was a thin line. He was real polite about it, real sorry. Said his hands were tied by the law. If Victor files charges with the territorial marshal, Carson's got no choice but to enforce whatever comes down. He's Victor's friend? Don't think so. Just a man trying to do his job without getting crushed between bigger powers than him. Ethan carried his gear toward the house. Did say one thing that was interesting, though. Said territorial laws got some gray areas when it comes to labor contracts with non-citizens. Said if we wanted to fight it, we'd need a lawyer who understands those gray areas and isn't afraid of making powerful people angry. Where do we find such a lawyer? That's the problem. Most lawyers in the territory depend on men like Victor for their living. Going against him means losing more business than they can afford. He set down the saddlebags, pulled out a folded newspaper. But Carson mentioned a name, woman lawyer practicing out of Rollins, Elizabeth Mercer. Said she's got a reputation for taking cases nobody else will touch. Maylene stared at him. Woman lawyer? Apparently. Rare, but not unheard of out here. Territory's got different rules than back east. Ethan unfolded the newspaper, showed her a small advertisement. She's got an office on Cedar Street, handles contract disputes, property rights, cases involving territorial versus federal law. You think she would help us? Don't know, but it's worth asking. He looked at Maylene steadily. Trip to Rollins is 2 days' ride. We'd need to leave tomorrow if we're going to be back before Victor's deadline. Both of us? You're the one who needs a lawyer. She'll want to hear your story directly, not filtered through me. The idea of leaving the safety of the ranch terrified her, but Maylene forced herself to think past fear. Ethan was right. If they were going to fight this legally, she couldn't hide forever. We go together, she said. They left before dawn, Maylene riding one of Ethan's gentler horses, both of them armed and watchful. The landscape unrolled endlessly around them, grassland and distant mountains, sky so big it seemed to press down like weight. Maylene had forgotten how exposed the frontier was, how small it made people seem. They rode in silence for the most part, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and drink from canteens. Ethan was alert but not tense, scanning the horizon out of habit rather than immediate fear. Maylene tried to match his calm but couldn't quite manage it, jumping at every unexpected sound. You're doing fine, Ethan said during one of their rest stops. I'm terrified. Being scared and doing it anyway, that's what courage is. He checked the horse's hooves, adjusted the saddle blankets. Courage isn't not being afraid. It's being afraid and moving forward regardless. Is that what you did? When Sarah's family rejected you? Every single day. He straightened, looked at her. Still do, if I'm honest. World's a scary place. Easier to hide from it than face it. But hiding doesn't get you anywhere worth being. They reached Rollins late afternoon the second day. The town was larger than Maylene expected. Actual streets, brick buildings, the bustle of commerce and civilization. People stared as they rode through, their eyes tracking the Chinese woman in men's clothes riding beside a rancher who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Ethan ignored the stares, guided them to a modest office on Cedar Street. A painted sign read, Elizabeth Mercer, attorney at law. This is it, he said, dismounting. You ready? Maylene looked at the door, at the promise and risk it represented. No, but we do it anyway. Ethan smiled slightly. Fast learner. The office was small but tidy, furnished with a desk, chairs, and shelves crammed with law books. Behind the desk sat a woman perhaps 40 years old, with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked up as they entered, her expression shifting from professional curiosity to genuine interest. Help you folks? Her voice was crisp, Eastern educated, but with enough Western edge to show she'd adapted. You Elizabeth Mercer? Ethan asked. Guilty as charged. And you are? Ethan Cole. This is Maylene Joe. We've got a problem that needs legal help. Elizabeth gestured to the chairs. Sit. Tell me about this problem. Maylene sat, her hands folded in her lap, and told her story. Not the sanitized version she might have given a stranger, but the truth, the contract in San Francisco, the reality of Victor's household, the abuse disguised as legal service, her escape, and Ethan's protection. Elizabeth listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, her expression growing darker as the narrative progressed. When Maylene finished, Elizabeth sat back, tapping her pen against her notebook. "That's quite a situation," she said finally. "And you're right to be concerned. On paper, Victor Hale has a strong case. The contract was legal when signed, properly witnessed, filed with territorial authorities. Breaking it does technically constitute theft of service under current law." "But," Maylene started. "But," Elizabeth continued, "there are complications. First, labor contracts can be voided if they violate federal statutes, and forcing someone to work without the ability to leave is slavery by another name. Second, territorial law is murky on contracts involving non-citizens, especially when those contracts essentially create indentured servitude. Third, abuse within the contract relationship can be grounds for nullification. Can we win? Ethan asked. Elizabeth was quiet, considering. In court? Maybe. It would depend on the judge, the evidence, how well Victor's lawyers perform versus how well I do. It's not impossible, but it's far from guaranteed. What about outside court? Maylene asked. Is there other way? Possibly. If we could get the territorial marshal to refuse enforcement of Victor's claims, that would effectively neutralize his legal standing without requiring a trial. Elizabeth flipped through her notes. But that's a political question, not a legal one. The marshal answers to the territorial governor, and the governor answers to people with money and influence, people like Victor Hale. So we're stuck, Ethan said flatly. Not necessarily. There is one more option. Elizabeth looked at Maylene directly. You could make the fight public, force Victor to defend his actions in the court of public opinion rather than just in a courtroom. How? Newspapers love stories about powerful men abusing vulnerable women, especially when there are racial and class elements involved. If we could get your story published with enough detail to make Victor look like the villain he is, it might create enough public pressure to change the political calculus. Maylene felt hope and terror mixing in equal measure. Victor would be furious. Yes, he would. He'd also be exposed. Hard to maintain a reputation as an upstanding citizen when the newspapers are printing stories about your Chinese mistress escaping abuse. Elizabeth's smile was sharp. Of course, going public means you can't hide anymore. You'd be making yourself a target in exchange for the chance at freedom. What are the odds? Ethan asked. Better than in court alone. Not as good as I'd like. Elizabeth closed her notebook. Here's what I can do. I can draw up an affidavit detailing Miss Jo's accusations. I can submit it to the territorial marshal as evidence that Victor's contract involved illegal coercion and abuse, and I can threaten to take the story public if the marshal doesn't intervene. Threaten? Maylene asked. Sometimes the threat is more powerful than the action. If Victor believes we're willing to destroy his reputation, he might back down rather than risk exposure. Elizabeth paused. But you need to understand, if he calls our bluff, we have to follow through. Once this becomes public, there's no taking it back. Ethan looked at Maylene. Your choice. It was, Maylene realized. Truly her choice, perhaps for the first time since signing that contract in San Francisco. She could say no, could choose safety over risk, could run again and hope to outpace Victor's reach. Or she could fight, could risk everything on the chance that truth mattered more than power, that public shame could accomplish what private law could not. She thought about her mother, about the letters she'd written promising she was safe and free. She thought about the garden she'd brought back to life. She thought about Ethan standing alone against 6 armed men because it was the right thing to do. She thought about who she wanted to be when this was over. We do it, she said. We fight. Elizabeth smiled properly for the first time. Good, I'll start drafting the affidavit tonight. You two should stay in town. There's a boarding house on Main Street that's respectable. Tomorrow we'll submit everything to the marshal's office and see what happens. They left the office as the sun was setting. Rollins painted gold and shadow around them. Ethan was quiet, processing, but Maylene felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not quite hope. Not yet. But perhaps the beginning of it. They found the boarding house, took separate rooms, ate dinner in silence at the communal table. Other guests stared at Maylene, whispered behind their hands, but she ignored them. She'd survived worse than disapproving looks. That night, she lay in an unfamiliar bed and wrote another letter to her mother, telling her about lawyers and newspapers, and the choice to stop running. She wasn't sure she'd ever send it, wasn't sure her mother would understand even if she did, but writing it made the decision feel more real, made her feel more real. In the room next door, she could hear Ethan moving around, preparing weapons, staying alert even here, protecting her even when she couldn't see him doing it. She fell asleep thinking about trust, about the strange alchemy that had transformed two wounded strangers into something that felt almost like allies, almost like friends. Tomorrow they would see if that was enough to stand against power, money, and the law itself. Tonight, for the first time in years, Maylene Jo slept believing it might be. Morning came too fast and not fast enough. Maylene woke to pale light filtering through thin curtains and the sound of wagon wheels on cobblestone, Rollins stirring to life outside her window. For a moment she lay still, letting herself pretend this was just another day, that nothing important hung in the balance. Then she remembered where she was and why, and the pretending stopped. She dressed in the same borrowed clothes, Ethan's shirt and pants, the rope belt, and braided her hair back tightly. In the mirror, she looked like someone caught between worlds, neither properly Chinese nor American, neither servant nor free. Just a woman trying to become something the law didn't quite have words for. Ethan was already downstairs when she came down, coffee in hand, staring out the window at the street. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Sleep at all?" he asked. "Some. You?" "Enough." He didn't elaborate, but the shadows under his eyes told their own story. "Elizabeth sent word. Wants to meet us at her office in an hour. Said she's got the affidavit ready." Maylene poured herself coffee, hands steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "Once we do this, there's no going back." "No," Ethan agreed. "There's not." They finished their coffee in silence, then walked through Rollins' morning streets to Cedar Street. The town felt different in daylight, more real, less like the half-dream quality of the previous evening. People moved with purpose. Shops opened, the rhythms of commerce and survival playing out in 100 small transactions. Elizabeth was waiting for them, her office already organized for the day ahead. She had papers spread across her desk, several documents already prepared and waiting for signatures. "Good, you're prompt," she said. "We don't have much time if we're going to beat Victor to the marshal's office." She pushed a sheaf of papers toward Maylene. "This is your affidavit. Read it carefully. Make sure everything is accurate. Once you sign it, it becomes an official legal document." Maylene took the papers with trembling hands and began to read. Elizabeth's prose was clinical but devastating, laying out in precise legal language exactly what Victor had done. The contract terms that amounted to slavery, the physical abuse disguised as discipline, the systematic isolation and control, the sexual coercion hidden behind the facade of legitimate service. Seeing it written down like this, official, documented, undeniable, made Maylene feel simultaneously exposed and vindicated. This was her truth, no longer just whispered fear but formal accusation. "It's accurate," she said quietly when she'd finished. "All of it. Then sign here." Elizabeth indicated several places marked with small penciled X's. "Your full legal name. And understand, once this is filed, Victor will know. He'll respond, probably aggressively. Are you prepared for that?" Maylene picked up the pen, dipped it in ink. The weight of it felt significant, like she was holding something more than just a writing instrument. She was holding the power to name what had been done to her, to make it official, to force the world to acknowledge that she was more than property. She signed her name in careful English letters, then again in Chinese characters beneath it, claiming both identities, refusing to be reduced to either one alone. Elizabeth witnessed the signature, then gathered the papers with brisk efficiency. "Good. Now, here's what happens next. We go to the territorial marshal's office. We file this affidavit as evidence of criminal wrongdoing, specifically slavery and abuse under color of law. We request that the marshal refuse enforcement of any claims Victor might file." "And if he refuses?" Ethan asked. "Then we go public. I've already drafted a statement for the newspapers." Elizabeth pulled out another document. This one's more accessible than the legal filing. Human interest, emotional truth. The story of a young woman sold into slavery by a man hiding behind legal contracts. Maylene read through it quickly. It was devastating in a different way than the affidavit, less clinical, more raw. Elizabeth had captured not just what happened, but what it felt like, the human cost of Victor's cruelty. "You're good at this," Maylene said. "I've had practice. Women don't become lawyers by being gentle with the truth." Elizabeth stood, smoothing her skirt. "Ready?" They walked together to the territorial marshal's office, a solid brick building near the center of town. Inside, a deputy sat at a desk, looking up with mild interest as they entered. "Help you folks?" he asked. "We need to see Marshal Hendricks," Elizabeth said. "It's urgent." "Marshal's busy right now. You can wait or come back later." "We'll wait." They sat on hard wooden benches while the deputy returned to his paperwork. Minutes crawled past. Maylene could feel her courage leaking away with each tick of the wall clock, replaced by growing certainty that this was a mistake, that they were about to make everything worse. Ethan must have sensed it because he leaned close and whispered, "Breathe. You're doing fine." Before she could respond, the inner office door opened and a man emerged, tall, graying, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades enforcing law and country that didn't always want to be civilized. This was Marshal Hendricks. He looked at the three of them with sharp, assessing eyes. "Elizabeth, didn't expect to see you here." "Marshal, we need to discuss a legal matter of some urgency." Hendricks' gaze shifted to Maylene, then to Ethan. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or just the quick calculation of a man used to reading situations. "Come in," he said. His office was sparse but organized, maps on the walls, files stacked neatly, a desk that showed signs of actual use rather than decoration. Hendricks settled behind it, gestured for them to sit. "Speak your piece," he said. Elizabeth laid out the situation with the same efficiency she'd shown in her office. The contract, the abuse, the escape, Victor's pursuit, and now the formal accusation. She presented the affidavit with calm authority, sliding it across the desk. Hendricks read it slowly, his expression neutral. When he finished, he set it down carefully and looked at Maylene. "This true?" he asked. "All of it?" "Yes, Maylene said, meeting his eyes despite her fear. "You understand what you're accusing Victor Hale of? The weight of these allegations?" "I understand." Hendricks leaned back, his chair creaking. "Victor Hale is a prominent citizen, contributes to territorial development, serves on civic boards, has connections all the way to Washington. You're asking me to take the word of a—" He paused, chose his words carefully. "A foreign national with no legal standing against a man of established reputation." "I'm asking you to enforce the law," Elizabeth interjected. "Federal law prohibits slavery. The 13th Amendment doesn't make exceptions for labor contracts or foreign nationals. That's one interpretation. It's the correct interpretation. And if you choose to ignore it, I will make sure every newspaper in the territory knows that the territorial marshal refused to act on documented evidence of slavery because the perpetrator had money and connections." The threat hung in the air between them. Hendricks studied Elizabeth with the look of a man reassessing an opponent he'd underestimated. "You'd really do that," he said. "Not a question. Without hesitation." Hendricks was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the desk. Finally, he sighed. "I can't stop Victor from filing charges if he wants to. That's his right under territorial law. What I can do is investigate these allegations before enforcing any claims he makes." "How long will that take?" Ethan asked. "As long as it takes to get answers I trust. Could be days. Could be weeks." Hendricks picked up the affidavit again. "I'll need to interview witnesses, review the original contract, potentially send inquiries to San Francisco about how Miss Joe was recruited. This isn't something I can resolve in an afternoon." "But you'll investigate," Elizabeth pressed. "Officially." "Yes, officially." He looked at Maylene. "You'll need to stay available for questioning. And Miss Joe, if you're lying about any of this, if you're trying to escape legitimate debts through false accusations, you will face charges yourself." "I'm not lying," Maylene said quietly. "Then we'll find that out too." Hendricks stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Give my clerk your contact information. I'll send word when I have questions." They left the office with more than they'd arrived with, but less than they'd hoped for. On the street outside, Elizabeth turned to them. "That went better than I expected," she said. "He didn't commit to anything," Ethan pointed out. "He committed to investigating. That's huge. It means he's taking this seriously, that he sees potential merit in the accusations." Elizabeth adjusted her bag. "More importantly, it means Victor can't just waltz in here and demand enforcement. Hendricks will tell him there's an active investigation, which buys us time." "How much time?" Maylene asked. "Enough, hopefully. Now we wait and see what Victor does next." They didn't have to wait long. They were halfway back to the boarding house when Maylene saw the carriage. Expensive, polished, pulled by matched horses that cost more than most people earned in a year. It rolled to a stop directly in front of them, blocking their path. Victor Hale stepped out, immaculate in a tailored suit, his expression cold and controlled. "Miss Joe," he said pleasantly, as if they'd encountered each other at a social gathering. "What a pleasant surprise to find you in Rollins." Maylene froze. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to do anything but stand here facing the man who'd owned her. But Ethan moved slightly, positioning himself between her and Victor, and that small act of protection gave her the strength to stay still. "Mr. Hale," Elizabeth said smoothly, stepping forward. "I'm Elizabeth Mercer, Miss Joe's legal counsel. I must ask you to refrain from direct contact with my client." Victor's eyes flicked to Elizabeth, dismissed her, returned to Maylene. "Legal counsel. How industrious you've been, my dear, though I'm afraid whatever lies you've told your new friends won't change the fundamental facts. You signed a contract. You owe me service, and I intend to collect." "The marshal is investigating your contract," Elizabeth said. "Until that investigation concludes, Miss Joe is under no obligation to return to your custody." "The marshal?" Victor smiled, cold and amused. "Yes, I heard about your little visit to his office. Very dramatic. Very unfortunate for you that Hendricks is a practical man who understands the difference between legal fantasy and reality. He seemed to take the allegations quite seriously. He'll make a show of investigating because that's what the law requires, but when he's done shuffling papers and asking questions, he'll reach the same conclusion as everyone else, that Miss Joe is trying to escape legitimate debts through fabricated accusations of abuse." Victor's tone remained pleasant, but steel ran underneath it. "The law is clear, the contract is valid, and my patience is wearing thin." "Your patience is irrelevant," Ethan said, speaking for the first time. "She's not going with you." Victor finally looked at him directly. "Mr. Cole, the rancher playing hero. How noble. How utterly pointless." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "This is a complaint I filed this morning with the territorial marshal formally accusing you of theft, harboring a fugitive, and interfering with legal contract enforcement. There are federal charges mixed in too, violations of the Fugitive Slave Act provisions that still apply to labor contracts." "The Fugitive Slave Act was nullified by the 13th Amendment," Elizabeth said sharply. "Some provisions were. Others remain in legal gray areas, particularly regarding contracts signed before statehood." Victor tucked the paper away. "My lawyers assure me the case is solid. By the end of the week, Mr. Cole will be in custody, and Miss Joe will be returned to me. You can delay that outcome, you can make it expensive, but you cannot prevent it." "We'll see," Elizabeth said. "Yes, we will." Victor turned back to Maylene, and his voice dropped, became almost intimate. "This is your last chance, my dear. Come back now voluntarily, and I'll forget about all this unpleasantness. You can return to your duties, we'll renegotiate your contract terms, and life will continue as before. But if you force me to reclaim you through legal channels, I promise you will regret it. I can make the rest of your service very unpleasant." The threat was clear, specific. The same promise he'd made before, that resistance would be punished, that defiance had a cost she couldn't afford to pay. But something had changed in Maylene since collapsing in Ethan's yard. Something had hardened, crystallized into resolve that fear couldn't quite dissolve. "No," she said. The word came out steadier than she'd expected. Victor's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "I'm sorry. No, I won't come back. Not now, not voluntarily, not ever." "You don't have a choice." "I do. I just made it." The silence that followed felt dangerous. charged with the kind of tension that preceded violence. Victor looked at her like she was a possession that had inexplicably developed will, something that needed to be corrected and returned to proper function. "Very well," he said finally. "I tried to be reasonable. I offered you a path back that wouldn't involve courts and public scandal. You've rejected that path. What happens next is on you." He climbed back into his carriage, gave some instruction to his driver. The carriage pulled away, rolling down the street with the smooth inevitability of money and power moving through a world designed to accommodate both. Maylene watched it go, her hands shaking now that the confrontation was over. "You did good," Ethan said quietly. "I called him a liar in front of witnesses. He will destroy us for that." "Maybe, but you stood up to him. That counts for something." Elizabeth was already moving, her mind clearly working through implications and next steps. "We need to move fast. Victor's filing complaints means he's preparing for a legal battle. We should do the same. I'll need to draft a formal response, gather supporting evidence, prepare for the possibility of a hearing." "How long do we have?" Ethan asked. "Days, not weeks. Victor's motivated now. He'll push for quick resolution." Elizabeth looked at them both. "You two should go back to Cole's ranch. Being in town makes you too accessible, too vulnerable. I'll handle the legal preparation and send word when I need you." "What about the newspapers?" Maylene asked. "The public statement?" Elizabeth hesitated. "That's a nuclear option. Once we publish, there's no taking it back, and Victor will respond with everything he has. I'd rather hold it in reserve, use it only if the legal fight starts going badly." "Or if Victor forces our hand," Ethan said. "Or that." Elizabeth gathered her papers. "Go, be careful, and trust that I'm doing everything possible on this end." They left Rollins that afternoon, riding hard, putting distance between themselves and Victor's reach. Maylene kept expecting pursuit, hired men, legal officers, someone to stop them and drag her back. But the horizon stayed empty, the grassland stretching endlessly without interruption. They made camp that night under stars so thick they seemed close enough to touch. Ethan built a small fire, made coffee, rationed out the food they'd brought. Maylene sat close to the flames, trying to absorb their warmth against the chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "You think Elizabeth can win?" she asked. Ethan poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral upward. "I think she'll fight like hell. Whether that's enough depends on things outside her control. Judges, politics, how much Victor's willing to spend to get his way. So we might lose." "Yeah, we might." The honesty hurt, but Maylene preferred it to false comfort. "What happens if we do? If courts say I must go back?" Ethan was quiet for a long time, the fire crackling between them. "Then we have a different choice to make." "What choice?" "Whether you go back or whether we run." Maylene looked at him across the flames. "Run where?" "He will chase me anywhere." "Not if we go far enough. Canada's not that distant. Different country, different laws. Victor's contracts wouldn't mean anything up there." The suggestion stunned her. "You would do that? Leave your ranch, your life, everything you built?" "Ranch is just land and buildings. Life is what you make of the time you're given." Ethan met her eyes. "I've already lost the people who made this place matter. What's left is just going through motions, surviving instead of living, helping you, fighting for you. That's the first time in 3 years I've felt like I was doing something worth doing. That's not fair to you. I can't be your purpose. You're not. The choice to do right, that's the purpose. You're just the circumstance that made the choice necessary." He threw another stick on the fire. "Point is, if it comes to running, we run. I'll make sure you're safe first, then figure out the rest later." Maylene felt something crack in her chest, some wall she'd built to protect herself from trusting too much. "Why? Why do you care this much?" "Already told you. You reminded me what it feels like to care about something. That's not enough reason to throw away your whole life. It's the only reason that matters." Ethan's voice was quiet, but certain. "Life without purpose is just waiting to die. I did that for 3 years. Don't care to do it anymore." They sat in silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers. Maylene thought about choices and consequences, about the strange alchemy that had transformed a desperate escape into something that felt almost like partnership. She'd spent 2 years believing she was nothing, worth nothing, entitled to nothing, and here was a man willing to risk everything he had to prove that belief wrong. "Thank you," she finally said, "for seeing me, for treating me like I matter." "You do matter. That's not something I'm giving you. That's something that's true whether I acknowledge it or not." The simple certainty of it undid her. Maylene felt tears burning behind her eyes, tried to blink them away, failed. They spilled hot down her cheeks, carrying months of fear and pain and desperate hope that maybe, possibly, the world contained more kindness than cruelty. Ethan didn't try to comfort her, didn't tell her to stop crying or that everything would be okay. He just sat with her while she wept, keeping watch over the darkness beyond their small circle of firelight, steady and solid and present. When she finally stopped, exhausted and raw, he handed her his canteen. "Drink. Crying takes water out of you." She drank, wiped her face with her sleeve, felt something settle in her chest that had been churning since Rollins. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Yeah, me too." "But we keep going." "Yeah, we keep going." They reached the ranch late the next day, both of them exhausted and saddle-sore. The house looked exactly as they'd left it, weathered, modest, honest in its simplicity. Maylene had only been gone a few days, but it felt like coming home in a way Victor's mansion never had. She was in the kitchen making coffee when Ethan came in from settling the horses. "Someone was here," he said. Fear spiked through her. "Victor's men?" "Don't know. Didn't see anyone, but tracks near the barn are fresh. More than one horse." He checked his rifle, confirmed it was loaded. "Could be nothing. Could be we're being watched." That night they both slept lightly, waking at every sound, hands never far from weapons. But no attack came, no riders appeared. Just the normal sounds of the frontier, wind and animals, and the house settling. Morning brought a visitor, but not the kind they'd feared. A young boy rode up on a tired horse, carrying a sealed envelope. "Message for Ethan Cole," he said, handing it over before riding off without waiting for a response or a tip. Ethan broke the seal, read quickly, his expression darkening. "What is it?" Maylene asked. "Elizabeth. Says Victor's pushed for an emergency hearing, day after tomorrow in Rollins, Judge Morrison presiding." He read further. "She says Morrison's known for respecting property rights over personal freedom arguments. Means we're starting from behind." "We have to go back?" "You do. You're the one being called to testify." "I can stay here, won't make a difference." "No." Maylene interrupted him, certain. "We go together, like before." Ethan looked at her, something complicated crossing his face. "You sure? This is going to get ugly. Victor will have his lawyers tear apart your story, your character, everything about you. It won't be easy to sit through." "Nothing about this is easy, but I don't have to do it alone." She met his eyes. "Right?" "Right," he agreed quietly. "You don't have to do it alone." They left the next morning, making the ride to Rollins in grim silence. Maylene felt like she was riding toward judgment, toward some final accounting of whether her life and freedom mattered enough to be protected by law designed for people who looked nothing like her. The hearing was set for the territorial courthouse, an imposing stone building that seemed designed to make people feel small. Elizabeth met them outside, her expression controlled but tense. "I've prepared as well as I can," she said. "But Morrison's going to be difficult. He believes in strict contract interpretation, minimal government interference in private agreements. Our best chance is to prove Victor's contract violates federal law, which supersedes territorial contract enforcement." "What do you need from me?" Maylene asked. "Truth. Simple, clear, unshakable truth. Don't embellish, don't get emotional, just state facts. Victor's lawyers will try to provoke you, to make you seem hysterical or unreliable. Don't give them that ammunition." Inside, the courtroom was smaller than Maylene expected, wood-paneled and austere. Victor sat at one table with 2 lawyers in expensive suits. Elizabeth directed Maylene and Ethan to chairs behind her table, the plaintiff's side. Judge Morrison entered, an older man, severe, with the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile. Everyone stood until he settled behind the bench. "Be seated," he said, his voice carrying authority that allowed no argument. "Let's proceed. This is an emergency hearing regarding the matter of Victor Hale versus Maylene Joe and Ethan Cole. Mr. Hale's counsel may present their case." Victor's lead lawyer stood, smooth and confident. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of contract enforcement. Miss Joe signed a legal agreement of service with my client, properly witnessed and filed. She has violated that agreement by fleeing and refusing to return. Mr. Cole has aided in this violation by harboring her. We are simply asking the court to enforce the contract and order Miss Joe's return to fulfill her obligations. He laid out the case with clinical precision. The contract signed in San Francisco, the terms agreed to, the breach committed. Made it sound reasonable, almost boring in its simplicity. Morrison listened without expression. When the lawyer finished, he turned to Elizabeth. Counsel for the defense? Elizabeth stood, and Maylene could see the transformation, the mild-mannered lawyer becoming something sharper, more dangerous. Your Honor, this is not a contract dispute. This is a case of slavery disguised as legal service. The contract Mr. Hale presents may have been technically legal when signed, but its execution violated federal law prohibiting involuntary servitude. Miss Joe was not an employee. She was a prisoner, held against her will, abused, and denied the most basic freedoms. No contract can make that legal. Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly. Strong words, Counselor. Can you prove them? Yes, Your Honor. I have Miss Joe's sworn affidavit detailing the conditions of her service. I also have— Objection, Victor's lawyer interrupted. Unsubstantiated accusations from a biased party are not proof. They're testimony, which is evidence, Elizabeth countered. And I have corroborating evidence, medical examination documenting injuries consistent with abuse, testimony from Mr. Cole regarding Miss Joe's condition when she arrived at his ranch, an expert analysis of the contract terms showing they exceed legal bounds of employment. Morrison held up a hand. I'll allow testimony. Miss Joe, please take the stand. Maylin's legs felt unsteady as she walked to the witness chair. A bailiff swore her in, and she sat facing the courtroom, facing Victor, feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way that made her skin crawl. Elizabeth approached gently. Miss Joe, please tell the court how you came to sign the contract with Mr. Hale. Maylene took a breath, found her voice. I was in San Francisco. My family in China needed money. Men came to Chinatown, said they had work for Chinese women, domestic service, good pay, respectable. I speak English, can read some. Seemed like opportunity. What did they tell you the work would entail? Housekeeper, cook, regular household duties. They said contract was standard, showed me where to sign. I signed because my family was desperate. Did you understand all the terms? No. English is hard. Legal English is harder. I trusted them when they said it was normal. Elizabeth nodded. What happened when you arrived at Mr. Hale's residence in Cheyenne? This was the difficult part. Maylene forced herself to keep her voice steady, to state facts without emotion like Elizabeth had instructed. I was not housekeeper. I was possession. Mr. Hale kept me locked in rooms, controlled everything, what I wore, what I ate, who I spoke to. He said I owed him money for bringing me to Wyoming, for housing me, for teaching me proper English. Said I would work off debt, but debt only grew. Did he physically harm you? Yes. The single word carried years of accumulated pain. Can you describe— Objection, Victor's lawyer stood. This is degenerating into theatrical accusations without evidence. Where's the proof of these alleged abuses? I have medical records, Elizabeth said sharply. From when? Created after Miss Joe fled? Convenient timing. Morrison looked at Maylin. Miss Joe, do you have any documentation of abuse from the time it allegedly occurred? Maylene's heart sank. No, Your Honor. Mr. Hale controlled everything. I could not see Doctor without his permission. He would not give permission. So we have only your word for these accusations. Yes, Your Honor. Morrison's expression didn't change, but Maylin could feel the case slipping away. Words without proof, accusations without corroboration, the same position she'd been in when she'd tried to report to the Cheyenne sheriff. Victor's lawyer moved in for cross-examination, his voice sympathetic in a way that felt like mockery. Miss Joe, you admit you signed the contract voluntarily? I signed, yes, but I did not understand. A simple yes or no, please. You signed voluntarily? Yes. And the contract specified a term of service, 5 years, correct? Yes. How long did you serve before fleeing? 2 years. So you left 3 years early, breaking your agreement. He paused. Were you physically restrained? Chained? Locked in a cell? Maylene hesitated. The truth was more complicated than physical chains. Not chained, but so you were free to leave at any time. No, he controlled everything, said he would report me to authorities, that I would be deported. But he didn't physically prevent your departure. You simply chose not to leave until it suited you. The lawyer's voice remained gentle, reasonable. Miss Joe, isn't it true that you're making these accusations now because you regret your decision, because you want to escape legitimate debts without consequences? No, I tell truth, a truth that conveniently emerged only after you decided you didn't want to honor your commitments. He turned to Morrison. Your Honor, this is clearly a case of buyer's remorse masquerading as abuse allegations. Miss Joe made choices she now regrets and is attempting to void a legal contract through unsubstantiated accusations against a respected citizen. Elizabeth objected, tried to redirect, but Maylene could see Morrison's face, could read the doubt forming there. She was foreign, propertyless, without status. Victor was American, wealthy, established. The scales were weighted before anyone testified. The hearing continued for another hour. More questions, more objections, technical arguments about federal versus territorial law. But Maylene could feel the outcome solidifying, becoming inevitable. Finally, Morrison called a halt. I've heard enough. I'll issue my ruling tomorrow morning. Court is adjourned. Outside, Elizabeth was furious. He's going to rule against us. I can feel it. What do we do? Maylene asked, though she already knew the answer. We prepare for the appeal, and we prepare the newspaper statement. Elizabeth looked at them both. If Morrison rules for Victor tomorrow, we go nuclear. We publish everything, make this public, force the territory to choose between law and justice. Ethan was silent, his jaw tight. That night in the boarding house, Maylene couldn't sleep. She stood at the window watching Rollins settle into darkness, thinking about choices and consequences and the terrible weight of depending on systems designed to exclude people like her. A knock at her door, Ethan's voice. You awake? She opened the door. He stood there, fully dressed despite the late hour. We should go, he said quietly. Now, tonight, before Morrison rules. Once he sides with Victor, leaving gets a lot harder. Run? Maylene asked. Yeah, run. Canada's 3 days hard ride north. We could make it before anyone realizes we're gone. It was tempting, so tempting. To escape before the hammer fell, to choose freedom over fighting a battle they were going to lose. But something in Maylene resisted. If we run now, Victor wins. He gets to keep his reputation, his power, everything. Nothing changes. You survive. That's what matters. Is it? She met his eyes. What kind of survival? Always looking over my shoulder, always afraid, never able to come back, to have a real life. A free life. A hidden life. Not the same thing. Maylene moved to the window, looked out at the sleeping town. Elizabeth said we could publish the statement, make it public, force people to see what Victor really is. That's revenge, not safety. Maybe I want both. She turned back to him. My whole life, I've been taught to be quiet, accept what powerful people do, survive by not making trouble. I'm tired of being quiet. I'm tired of surviving. I want to fight, even if I lose. Especially if I lose. Ethan studied her for a long moment. You're braver than I am. No, just tired of being afraid. She straightened her shoulders. We wait for Morrison's ruling. If he sides with Victor, we publish. We make sure everyone knows what kind of man he is. Then, if we have to run, we run. But not before we tell the truth where it matters. That's a hell of a risk. Yes, Maylene agreed. It is. The marshal's office occupied a stone building on the edge of Rollins' main square, flanked by the courthouse on one side and a saloon on the other. The proximity felt symbolic to Maylene. Justice, law, and vice all crowded together, none quite separate from the others. Elizabeth Mercer walked between them, carrying a leather folder thick with documents she'd worked on through the night. Her expression was set, determined, but Maylene could see the tension in her shoulders. This wasn't a sure thing. Nothing about this was sure. Let me do the talking, Elizabeth said as they reached the door. The marshal's name is Thomas Beckworth. He's fair, mostly, but he's also practical. He won't stick his neck out unless he sees a clear path forward that doesn't end with it getting chopped off. Reassuring, Ethan muttered. Elizabeth smiled tightly. I'm a lawyer, Mr. Cole, not a magician. The truth is that Victor Hale has more power in this territory than the three of us combined. We're not going to win by overpowering him. We're going to win by making it more expensive for him to fight than to walk away. She pushed open the door. The marshal's office was functional. A desk, filing cabinets, wanted posters on the walls, and a gun rack that held an impressive array of weapons. Behind the desk sat a man in his 50s with iron gray hair and a face that had seen enough to make optimism difficult. He looked up as they entered, his eyes registering Elizabeth first, then Ethan, finally settling on Mei Lin with an expression that was carefully neutral. Miss Mercer, he said, wasn't expecting you. Marshal Beckworth, thank you for seeing us without an appointment. Elizabeth set her folder on his desk. This is Ethan Cole and Maylene Joe. We're here regarding a complaint that may be filed against Mr. Cole by Victor Hale of Cheyenne. Beckworth's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or wariness. Mr. Hale hasn't filed anything with this office yet. But he will. Within the next 24 hours, I expect. Elizabeth opened the folder, extracted several pages. Before he does, I wanted to present evidence that his claim is based on an illegal contract that violates both federal and territorial law. Beckworth took the documents, scanned them with the practiced eye of someone who'd read too many legal papers to be impressed by fancy language. As he read, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. These are serious accusations, he said finally. They're true, Maylene said, her voice steadier than she felt. All of it. Beckworth looked at her directly for the first time. You understand what you're claiming here, that Victor Hale, one of the most prominent citizens in the territory, essentially enslaved you through fraudulent contract? Yes. And you're willing to testify to this under oath? Yes. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She forced herself to meet his gaze, to not flinch from whatever judgment she saw there. Marshal, Elizabeth said, the evidence clearly shows that Miss Joe's contract was obtained under false pretenses and enforced through coercion and abuse. Under federal law, I can read, Miss Mercer. Beckworth set down the documents. And I can see what you're trying to do here. You want me to refuse enforcement if Mr. Hale files charges. You want me to put my office between him and his legal claim to this woman's labor. I want you to uphold the law, Elizabeth corrected. The actual law, not the version that serves powerful men. That's a fine line you're asking me to walk. It's the line you swore to walk when you took this job. Beckworth's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You always were direct, Miss Mercer. I'll give you that. He picked up the documents again, flipped through them more slowly. Even if everything here is true, and I'm not saying it isn't, you've got a problem. Contract law in the territory is murky when it comes to non-citizens. The territorial courts have upheld similar agreements before. Under different circumstances, Elizabeth argued. None of those cases involved credible allegations of physical abuse and sexual coercion. You have evidence of abuse beyond Miss Joe's testimony? The scars on her back, Ethan said quietly. The ones she got from running through thorn bush trying to escape. The fact that she collapsed half dead in my yard after fleeing for her life. That count as evidence? Beckworth looked at Ethan, reassessing. You're the rancher who refused to turn her over when Mr. Hale's men came calling? That's right. That was either brave or stupid, possibly both. Probably both, Ethan agreed, but it was also right. Something shifted in Beckworth's expression, not agreement exactly, but perhaps understanding. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the street beyond. I served with Chinese railroad workers during the construction years, he said, his back to them. Good men, hard workers, treated like dirt by most whites, paid half what they deserved, died in accidents that nobody bothered investigating. He turned back. Saw enough to know that legal and right don't always overlap when it comes to how we treat people who look different. Then you understand, Maylene said, hope flaring. I understand that I am one marshal in a territory that depends on the goodwill of men like Victor Hale to function. I understand that if I refuse to enforce a legal contract without clear authority to do so, I'll be replaced by someone who will. He sat back down, looked at Elizabeth. What exactly are you asking me to do here? Delay, Elizabeth said. When Victor files his complaint, investigate it thoroughly before taking action. Give us time to file a formal challenge to the contract's legality in territorial court. If a judge rules the contract invalid, the whole matter becomes moot. And if the judge rules in Mr. Hale's favor, then you enforce the ruling. But at least Miss Jo will have had her day in court rather than being returned to her abuser based on paperwork alone. Beckworth was quiet for a long moment, fingers drumming on his desk. Finally, he sighed. I can give you a week, he said. Maybe 2 if I stretch the investigation. But that's it. After that, if you don't have a court ruling in your favor, I'll have no choice but to act on whatever Mr. Hale files. A week isn't enough time to, Elizabeth started. It's what I can offer without losing my job. Take it or leave it. Elizabeth looked at Maylene, then Ethan. Some silent communication passed between them. We'll take it, Elizabeth said. Thank you, Marshall. Don't thank me yet. I'm not doing you any favors, just buying time that might not matter. Beckworth gathered the documents, handed them back. And Miss Mercer, if you're planning what I think you're planning, going to the newspapers, making this public, you better make damn sure you can prove every word. Victor Hale has lawyers who'll bury you in libel suits if you give them even the smallest opening. I'm aware of the risks. I hope so, because once you light this fire, there's no putting it out. They left the marshal's office with 1 week and no guarantees. Elizabeth walked them back toward the boarding house, already planning next steps. The Rollins newspaper won't touch this, she said. Too small, too dependent on local advertising. But the Cheyenne Leader might. They've got a new editor, younger man with some backbone. If I can get to him before Victor does, that's a big if, Ethan said. Everything about this case is a big if. Elizabeth stopped at the corner. I'll take the afternoon stage to Cheyenne, talk to the editor tonight. Meanwhile, you 2 should get out of town. If Victor learns you're here, he might force a confrontation before we're ready. What about you? Maylene asked. If he finds out you're helping us, I'm a lawyer. Helping people is literally my job. He can't touch me for that. Elizabeth's smile was grim. Besides, I've been dealing with powerful men who don't like me since I passed the bar. Victor Hale doesn't scare me any more than the rest of them. She left them standing on the street corner, disappearing into the afternoon crowd with the purposeful stride of someone who knew exactly what battle they were walking into. She's brave, Maylene said quietly. She's crazy, Ethan corrected, which is why she might actually pull this off. They collected their horses and rode out of Rollins as the sun began its descent. Neither spoke much during the journey back, both lost in thoughts about what came next, what risks they'd committed to, how badly this could go wrong. They made camp that night in a shallow valley, building a small fire and eating jerky and hardtack in silence. Above them, stars emerged in impossible numbers, indifferent to human struggles playing out beneath them. What happens if we lose? Maylene asked, staring into the flames. Ethan poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. Then I probably go to jail for a while. You go back to Victor, and Elizabeth gets sued into poverty. That's not funny. Wasn't trying to be funny. You asked what happens if we lose. That's what happens. Maylene pulled her knees to her chest, suddenly cold despite the fire. I've been thinking, maybe I should leave. Run away for real this time. Go somewhere Victor can't find me. Where? I don't know. California? Canada? Somewhere. You'd be running forever, Ethan said. Always looking over your shoulder, never able to put down roots, never able to connect with anyone for fear they'd turn you in. Better than being owned. Maybe. Or maybe it's just a different kind of prison. He looked at her across the fire. You know what I regret most about Sarah dying? Not the time we lost, but the time we wasted being scared. Scared of her family, scared of what people thought, scared of being too happy because we knew it wouldn't last. And then it didn't last. And all that fear was just wasted energy that could have been spent living. What's your point? My point is that running is just another kind of fear, and fear's a terrible foundation for a life. Maylene was quiet, watching the fire consume itself, turning wood into ash and smoke and temporary warmth. "I've been afraid so long I don't know how to be anything else," she said finally. "Then maybe it's time to learn." The simple statement hung between them, heavy with implication. Maylin looked at Ethan, really looked at him, seeing past the rough exterior to the man who'd stood against armed riders, who'd given shelter without asking for payment, who'd risked everything for someone he barely knew. "Why do you care so much?" she asked. "Really, not the answer about Sarah or doing the right thing. The real reason." Ethan was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because when you showed up half dead in my yard, something in me recognized something in you. We're both survivors of things that should have killed us, both carrying grief we don't know how to put down, both trying to figure out if living is worth the effort." He met her eyes. "And maybe I thought, if I could help you find a reason to keep fighting, maybe I'd find one too." The honesty of it stole her breath. No romance, no rescue fantasy, just raw human need laid bare. "Have you?" she asked. "Found a reason?" "Getting there." He stood, started banking the fire. "We should sleep. Long ride tomorrow." Maylin wanted to say something more, to acknowledge what he'd shared, but the words wouldn't come. So she just nodded and rolled herself in her blanket, lying under stars that had witnessed countless human dramas and would witness countless more. But as she drifted towards sleep, she realized something had shifted. Fear was still there. It would probably always be there. But beneath it, growing like a stubborn weed through hard soil, was something else. Determination. Maybe even defiance. She'd spent 2 years being owned. She'd earned the right to fight back. They reached the ranch the next afternoon to find Sheriff Carson waiting on the porch. Maylin's heart jumped into her throat, but Ethan's hand on her arm was steady, calming. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Ethan said, dismounting carefully. "This official business?" Carson stood, his expression uncomfortable. "Afraid so. Got a complaint filed this morning by Victor Hale. Says you're harboring stolen property, specifically one Maylin Joe who's bound to him by legal contract." "We just came from the territorial marshal in Rollins," Ethan said. "He's aware of the situation and conducting an investigation into the validity of that contract. Marshal Beckworth contacted me about that, said I should hold off on any arrests pending his review." Carson shifted his weight. "But he also said I should inform you that Mr. Hale is demanding immediate action. Says if the law won't protect his property rights, he'll take matters into his own hands." "That a threat?" "That's a warning. Mr. Hale's angry, and angry rich men do stupid things." Carson looked at Maylin. "Miss, I don't know your situation. Don't know what's true and what's not. But I do know that Victor Hale doesn't make idle threats. If he says he's coming for you, he's coming." "Let him come," Maylin said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Carson nodded slowly, something like respect crossing his face. "Just be careful, both of you. Whatever's right or wrong here, getting killed over it won't help anybody." He left them standing in the yard, dust from his horse's hooves settling slowly in the still air. "He's right," Ethan said. "Victor's going to escalate. Probably soon. Then we prepare." They spent the rest of the day doing exactly that. Ethan checked weapons, loaded extra ammunition, positioned rifles at strategic points around the house. Maylin gathered supplies, food, water, medical materials, and stored them where they'd be accessible during a siege. It felt surreal, preparing for violence in the same space where she'd learned to cook cornbread and tend gardens. But the frontier had always been like this, she was learning. Beauty and brutality existing side by side, neither negating the other. That night they ate dinner in tense silence, both listening for sounds that didn't come. Maylin cleaned up afterward, her movements automatic, while Ethan sat by the window with his rifle across his knees. "You should sleep," he said without turning around. "I'll keep watch." "I can't sleep." "Try anyway. If Victor comes, I'll need you rested enough to shoot straight." The matter-of-fact way he said it, assuming she'd fight rather than hide, steadied something in her. She went to her room, lay down fully clothed, the pistol under her pillow. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by every creak of the house, every sound of wind against shutters. She dreamed of Victor's hands, of locked rooms, of running through endless thorn bush toward a freedom that stayed always out of reach. She woke to shouting. Sunlight streamed through the window, Late morning, she'd slept longer than intended. The shouting came from outside, multiple voices, angry and demanding. Maylene grabbed her pistol and ran to the front room. Ethan was at the window, rifle ready, his face grim. They're here. Victor and maybe a dozen men. Looks like he brought half of Cheyenne. What do they want? What do you think? Maylene moved to the other window, looked out. Victor sat his horse in the center of a loose semicircle of armed men, flanked by two men in suits who looked like lawyers or officials. Behind them, she could see several townspeople who'd apparently come along for the show. This wasn't a raid. It was a public demonstration. Victor saw her at the window and smiled. Not friendly, triumphant. "Miss Joe," he called out, his voice carrying easily, "I'm giving you one last chance to honor your contract and return to Cheyenne voluntarily. If you do so now, I'm willing to forgive your transgression and welcome you back without punishment." "Liar," Maylene whispered. "If you refuse," Victor continued, "I'll be forced to take legal action. I have here," he gestured to one of the suited men, "Deputy Marshal Hendricks from the Territorial Office. He's prepared to arrest Mr. Cole on charges of theft and to take you into protective custody pending resolution of your contract dispute." Ethan looked at the deputy, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable with his role in this theater. "Beckworth said we had a week," Ethan said. "Marshal Beckworth doesn't have authority over territorial matters," the deputy called back. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole, but I have my orders. You need to surrender Miss Joe and yourself peacefully. And if I don't? Then I'm authorized to use necessary force to execute my warrant." Maylene felt the situation spiraling, saw how carefully Victor had constructed this trap. If they surrendered, they lost. If they resisted, Ethan would be arrested for assaulting a federal officer and she'd be taken anyway. Either way, Victor won. "There has to be another way," she said desperately. Ethan's jaw was set, his eyes calculating distances, angles, possibilities. "Only one I can see. We make this ugly enough that Victor decides it's not worth the cost. You can't fight a dozen armed men. Don't plan to fight. Plan to make enough noise that people start asking questions." He raised his voice. "Deputy Hendricks, before you do anything you'll regret, you should know that an attorney has filed a formal challenge to Miss Joe's contract in territorial court. You take her into custody before that hearing, you're interfering with her legal rights." "I have no knowledge of any such filing," the deputy called back. "Then you're either incompetent or complicit. Either way, you lay one hand on this woman, and I promise you it'll be in every newspaper between here and Denver by week's end." Victor's expression darkened. "You're bluffing, Cole." "Am I? You willing to bet your reputation on that?" Ethan's voice carried confidence he might not have felt. "See, the thing about making this public is that people start looking real close at the details. Start asking questions about what exactly you had Miss Joe doing in that house of yours, about why a respectable gentleman needs to keep a Chinese woman under lock and key, about what kind of domestic service requires contracts that look an awful lot like ownership papers. You have no proof of anything improper. Don't need proof. Just need to ask the questions loud enough that your business partners and social connections start wondering. You really want possible slaver attached to your name in the society pages?" For the first time, uncertainty crossed Victor's face. The deputy looked between them, clearly regretting taking this assignment. Then another voice cut through the tension. "That's exactly what we intend to print." Everyone turned. A man in his 30s stood at the edge of the crowd, notebook in hand, looking entirely too pleased with himself. "Daniel Morrison, Cheyenne leader," he announced. "I've just come from a very interesting interview with attorney Elizabeth Mercer regarding allegations of contract fraud and forced servitude. Quite a story. Front-page material, I'd say." Victor's face went white, then red. "You print one word of unsubstantiated accusations and I'll sue you into oblivion." "Oh, I wouldn't dream of printing unsubstantiated material," Morrison said cheerfully. "That's why I'm here, getting the other side of the story. Mr. Hale, would you care to comment on allegations that you obtained Miss Joe's labor contract through fraudulent means and subsequently subjected her to physical and sexual abuse?" The words hung in the air like smoke from gunfire. The crowd shifted, murmured, suddenly uncertain about what entertainment they'd come to witness. Victor looked at Morrison with pure hatred. "This is slander. I'll have your job for this." "Freedom of the press, Mr. Hale. We're allowed to investigate matters of public interest, and I'd say labor trafficking in the territory qualifies." Morrison's smile was sharp. Unless you'd prefer to address these allegations directly, I'm happy to print your side of things. I have nothing to say to you. Interesting. So you don't deny the allegations? I don't acknowledge them. There's a difference. Victor turned to the deputy. Arrest Cole. Take the woman. Do your job. The deputy looked at Morrison, at the crowd, at the notebook recording every word. His hand didn't move toward his gun. Sir, he said slowly, perhaps we should wait for the territorial marshal to conclude his investigation before taking action, given the complexity of the situation. I'm ordering you, with respect, sir. I'm not comfortable arresting citizens when there's active legal challenges and press coverage. Might be better to let the courts sort this out proper. Victor's control finally cracked. You're all cowards, every single one of you. Fine, I'll handle this myself. He kicked his horse forward, clearly intending to ride straight to the house. Ethan's rifle came up, the barrel tracking Victor's movement. One more step and I will shoot you off that horse. You wouldn't dare. Test me. The two men locked eyes across 30 yards of Wyoming dirt. The moment stretched, taut as wire, everyone waiting to see who would break first. It was Morrison who broke the silence. Mr. Hale? I'm documenting this confrontation for publication. Please state clearly for the record, are you threatening violence against a woman who's filed legal complaints about your treatment of her? Victor froze, realizing the trap. Anything he said now would be printed, dissected, used against him. The public spectacle he'd orchestrated had turned into his own exposure. This isn't over, he said, voice shaking with rage. Not by a long shot. You think one newspaper article changes anything? I own this territory. I own judges, politicians, lawmen. You can't win against me. Maybe not, Ethan said. But we can make you lose. There's a difference. Victor stared at him, at Maylene in the window, at the reporter still scribbling notes. Then he yanked his horse around and galloped away, his men following in confusion. The crowd dispersed slowly, chattering about what they'd witnessed. The deputy tipped his hat apologetically and rode off. Morrison lingered, approaching the house with his notebook still open. Mr. Cole, Miss Joe, I'd love to get your full statements for my article. Ethan lowered the rifle but didn't set it down. How'd you know to be here? Miss Mercer sent a telegram yesterday saying something interesting might happen today. She was right. Morrison's grin was unapologetic. So, shall we talk? I promise to be fair. Maylin looked at Ethan, who nodded. We talk, she said. They spent the next hour on the porch, telling Morrison everything. The contract, the abuse, the escape, Ethan's protection. Morrison wrote it all down, asking pointed questions, verifying details, building a story that would make Victor squirm when it ran. When he finally left, promising the article would run in 2 days, Maylene and Ethan sat in silence, processing what had just happened. Is it over? Maylene asked. No, Ethan said, but it's different now, public. Harder for Victor to make you disappear quietly when people are watching. He'll still try. Probably, but now he's got to worry about witnesses, about reporters, about his reputation. Ethan finally set down the rifle. We bought time. What we do with it determines how this ends. Maylene stood, looked out at the land that had become home, at the garden she'd restored, at the space where she'd learned to shoot and cook and believe in the possibility of freedom. Then we use it to win, she said. For the first time since this started, those words didn't feel like foolish hope. They felt like truth. The article ran 2 days later under a headline that made Maylene's hands shake when she read it. Wealthy Cheyenne businessman accused of labor trafficking, abuse of Chinese woman. Morrison hadn't held back. Every detail she and Ethan had provided was there, laid out in stark black and white for anyone with 2 cents and the ability to read. Ethan bought 3 copies from the general store in town, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed him through the aisles. When he returned to the ranch, he spread them across the kitchen table like evidence in a trial. This is going to make things worse before they get better, he said. He was right. The first response came that afternoon, a telegram delivered by a nervous rider who wouldn't meet Maylene's eyes. It was from Victor's attorney, a man named Blackwood, who apparently charged enough per hour to afford threats written in perfect legal language. The telegram promised lawsuits for defamation, demanded immediate retraction, and suggested that continued resistance would result in consequences beyond simple legal action. "He's scared," Elizabeth said when Maylene read her the telegram's contents over the general store's telephone line. "Men like Victor don't threaten lawsuits unless they're worried the truth might actually matter." "What do we do?" "We push harder. I filed the formal contract challenge in territorial court. Hearing set for next week in Cheyenne. You'll need to testify." Maylene felt her stomach drop. "In front of Victor?" "In front of Victor, a judge, probably half the territory's social elite, who will show up to watch the spectacle." Elizabeth's voice was matter-of-fact. "I won't lie to you, Maylene. It's going to be brutal. They'll question everything. Your character, your motives, your truthfulness. They'll make it seem like you're the criminal for breaking a contract you signed voluntarily." "Maybe I should—" "Don't!" Elizabeth's tone sharpened. "Don't you dare say you should run or give up. We've come too far for that. You show up at that hearing, you tell the truth, and you let the judge decide. That's all we can do." After she hung up, Maylene sat at the kitchen table, staring at the newspaper articles without really seeing them. Ethan came in from checking the horses, took one look at her face, and poured 2 cups of coffee without asking. "You're thinking about running," he said. "How did you know?" "Because I've been thinking about it too. Wondering if maybe I pushed you into a fight you weren't ready for." He set a cup in front of her. "But then I remember you were the one who said you wanted to fight. I just gave you the tools." "What if I can't do it? What if I get in that courtroom and freeze?" "Then you freeze and we lose and life goes on being complicated and unfair." Ethan sat across from her. "But at least you'll have tried. At least you'll know you didn't just accept being owned without making them work for it." Maylene wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing comfort from the simple heat. "In China, we have a saying, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. I've spent my whole life trying not to stick up, trying to be small and quiet and unnoticeable." "How'd that work out?" She laughed, bitter and short. "I ended up owned by a monster who treated me like furniture, so not well. Maybe it's time to try sticking up then. See what happens." The days before the hearing passed in a strange blur of preparation and waiting. Elizabeth arrived 3 days early, transforming Ethan's kitchen into a makeshift legal office. She drilled Maylene on testimony, taught her how to answer questions without volunteering extra information, warned her about the tricks Victor's lawyers would use to discredit her. "They'll ask about your family in China," Elizabeth said during one session. "They'll try to suggest you're sending them money, that you're benefiting financially from the contract." "I haven't sent money in over a year. Victor stopped allowing it." "Can you prove that?" Maylene thought about the letters she'd written, the ones Ethan had mailed for her. "My mother, she could testify I stopped sending money. She's in China. We can't get testimony from her in time." Elizabeth made a note. "We'll have to rely on your word and hope the judge finds you credible." It all felt impossibly fragile. Her freedom balanced on whether a judge believed her over Victor, whether truth mattered more than power and money. The night before they were supposed to leave for Cheyenne, Maylene couldn't sleep. She found Ethan on the porch, sitting in the darkness, rifle across his lap out of habit. "You should be resting," he said without turning around. "Can't." She sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Ethan, if this goes badly, if I have to go back to Victor, promise me you won't try anything stupid. Define stupid. You know what I mean. Don't try to rescue me. Don't get yourself killed fighting a battle that's already lost." He was quiet for a long time. "Can't promise that." "Why not?" "Because I'm not built to watch someone get hurt and do nothing about it. Sarah died while I held her hand, and I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. I won't go through that again. I can't." The rawness in his voice made Maylene's chest ache. She reached over, found his hand in the darkness, squeezed it. "I don't want to be another person you feel responsible for saving." "Too late. You already are." He squeezed back. "But for what it's worth, I don't think you need saving. I think you're stronger than you know. Tomorrow you're going to walk into that courtroom and tell your truth, and Victor Hale is going to realize he picked a fight with the wrong woman. You have too much faith in me. Maybe. Or maybe I just see you clearer than you see yourself." They sat like that until dawn started painting the eastern sky, hands linked, drawing strength from each other's presence. When the sun finally rose, Maylene felt steadier. Not confident, not fearless, but ready. Ready to fight. They rode into Cheyenne the next day. Maylene, Ethan, and Elizabeth in a hired wagon since the journey was too long for Maylene on horseback. The city felt different now. No longer the place where she'd been imprisoned, but a battlefield where she'd make her stand. The territorial courthouse was an imposing brick building that dominated the town square. By the time they arrived, a crowd had already gathered. Curiosity seekers, reporters, society ladies who'd read Morrison's article and wanted to witness the scandal firsthand. Maylene saw their eyes tracking her as she climbed down from the wagon, felt their judgment like weight. "Ignore them," Elizabeth murmured. "They don't matter." But Maylene knew they did matter. These were Victor's people, the society he belonged to, the world that had enabled his cruelty through polite silence. What they thought, how they reacted, would influence the judge whether anyone admitted it or not. Inside, the courtroom was already packed. Maylene's eyes went immediately to Victor, sitting at the plaintiff's table with two expensive lawyers flanking him. He looked calm, confident, untouched by the scandal that had erupted around him. When he saw her, he smiled, that same cold smile she'd learned to fear during 2 years in his house. She didn't look away, didn't drop her eyes in submission like she'd been trained to do. His smile faltered slightly. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Marcus Thornton." The judge was older, maybe 60, with white hair and a face that gave nothing away. He settled into his chair, surveyed the packed courtroom with an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else, and banged his gavel once. "Let's keep this orderly," he said. "I've read the filings from both parties. Mr. Blackwood, you're representing the plaintiff. Make your opening statement." Victor's lead attorney stood, a sharp-featured man who moved with the precision of someone who won cases through preparation and intimidation. His opening statement was exactly what Elizabeth had warned about: cold, legal, focused entirely on contract law, while carefully avoiding any mention of what the contract had actually entailed. "This is a simple matter of enforcement," Blackwood said. "Miss Joe entered into a legal agreement, properly witnessed and filed, to provide domestic service to Mr. Hale for a period of 5 years in exchange for passage to America, room, board, and wages. She worked for approximately 2 years, then absconded without notice, stealing not only her own future labor but also items of value from Mr. Hale's residence. We are simply asking this court to enforce the contract she voluntarily signed and order her return to fulfill her obligations." It sounded so reasonable when he said it like that, so clean and simple. Elizabeth's opening was different, emotional, direct, painting a picture of fraud and abuse that made several people in the gallery shift uncomfortably. "This court must decide," she concluded, "whether we are a territory that upholds justice or one that enables the enslavement of vulnerable people through the manipulation of contract law. Miss Joe signed that contract believing she was agreeing to honest work. Instead, she found herself trapped in a situation that violated every principle of human dignity. We ask this court to nullify that contract and free her from bondage masquerading as employment." Judge Thornton's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Blackwood, call your first witness." The testimony started with dry facts. People who'd witnessed the contract signing in San Francisco, officials who'd processed the paperwork, Victor's housekeeper who testified that Maylene had been provided comfortable accommodations and regular meals. Each witness painted a picture of legitimate employment, careful to avoid mentioning locked doors or why a domestic servant needed a contract that prevented her from leaving. Then Victor himself took the stand. He was good. Maylene had to give him that. He played the role of wronged employer perfectly, disappointed, hurt by her betrayal, concerned only with upholding the law and recovering his property rights. When Blackwood asked if he'd ever mistreated her, his denial was smooth and convincing. "I provided Miss Joe with everything she needed," Victor said. "A position in my household, education to improve her English, introduction to American society. I treated her as I would any valued employee. Her decision to run away was baffling and frankly hurtful after all I'd done for her." Elizabeth stood for cross-examination, her movements sharp and controlled. "Mr. Hale, in your testimony you mentioned providing Miss Joe with a position in your household. What exactly were her duties?" "General domestic service. Cleaning, meal preparation, household management." Did those duties include sharing your bed? The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Judge Thornton banged his gavel. Miss Mercer, you will phrase your questions appropriately. I apologize, Your Honor. Let me rephrase. Elizabeth turned back to Victor. Mr. Hale, did you at any time engage in sexual relations with Miss Joe? Victor's jaw tightened. I refuse to answer that on grounds it's irrelevant to the contract dispute. Irrelevant? The contract specifies domestic service, not concubinage. If you were using Miss Joe for sexual purposes, that's material to whether the contract was being executed as written. My personal life has no bearing on this case. Your Honor, Elizabeth said, Mr. Hale's refusal to answer speaks volumes. If the relationship was purely professional, he would simply say so. Judge Thornton leaned forward. Mr. Hale, I'm going to require you to answer the question. Did you have sexual relations with Miss Joe during her employment? Victor looked at his lawyers, who nodded reluctantly. Yes, he said finally, but it was consensual. She never objected. The lie hit Maylene like a physical blow. She half rose from her seat before Ethan's hand on her shoulder stopped her. Elizabeth didn't miss a beat. Consensual. So when you locked her bedroom door from the outside each night, that was at her request? I never locked her door. Then why did she have to break a window to escape your house? I have no knowledge of any broken window. Elizabeth produced a photograph, handed it to the judge. This is Mr. Hale's residence, taken by a private investigator 3 days ago. You can clearly see the second-floor window with broken glass and torn curtains. That's Miss Joe's former room. Victor's composure cracked slightly. If a window was broken, it happened after she left, probably vandalism. Interesting theory. Miss Joe, did you break that window? Maylene stood on shaking legs. Yes, it was only way to escape. Door was locked from outside like every night. Objection, Blackwood said. Miss Joe isn't under oath yet. Her statements are inadmissible. Then let's put her under oath, Elizabeth said smoothly. Your Honor, I'd like to call Maylene Joe to the stand. This was it. The moment everything balanced on. Maylene walked to the witness stand, placed her hand on the Bible the clerk offered, and swore to tell the truth. The whole courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Elizabeth started gently, establishing basic facts: how Maylene had come to America, what she'd been promised, what she'd found instead. Then she moved into harder territory. Miss Joe, Mr. Hale testified that your sexual relationship was consensual. Is that true? Maylene looked directly at Victor. No, nothing with him was consensual. I was owned. Consent requires choice. I had none. Can you describe the conditions of your employment? And she did. In halting, painful detail, Maylene described the locked doors, the isolation, the nights Victor came to her room, the punishments when she resisted. She described stealing shoes to run away, tearing her dress on Thornbush, collapsing in Ethan's yard, believing she was dying. The courtroom was utterly silent. When she finished, Elizabeth said quietly, "Thank you. No further questions." Blackwood's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned her motives, suggested she was lying to avoid honoring her contract, implied she'd seduced Victor, and was now claiming assault to escape consequences. He painted her as a schemer, a manipulator, someone who'd taken advantage of Victor's generosity and was now destroying his reputation to cover her own crimes. Maylene answered each question as Elizabeth had taught her, calmly, without elaborating, sticking to facts. But she could feel herself cracking, the weight of Victor's lies and Blackwood's accusations pressing down until she couldn't breathe. "One final question, Miss Joe," Blackwood said. "If conditions were as terrible as you claim, why did you wait 2 years to escape? Why not leave immediately?" The question hit her like a slap, because it was the question she'd asked herself 1,000 times, the guilt she carried. "Because I was afraid," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because he told me I had nowhere to go, that no one would help a Chinese woman with no money and no connections. Because every time I thought about running, I remembered I signed that contract, and I believed that made everything legal, made me his property." She looked at Blackwood, then at Victor, then at the judge. "I was wrong. I should have run sooner, but fear makes people stay in terrible situations. That doesn't make those situations right." Blackwood opened his mouth, then closed it again. "No further questions." Maylene stepped down, her legs barely holding her. Ethan met her eyes as she passed, gave her a slight nod that said everything words couldn't. Judge Thornton called a recess. The courtroom emptied into the hallway, people clustering in groups to dissect what they'd heard. Malin found a quiet corner, Elizabeth and Ethan flanking her protectively. "You did well," Elizabeth said. "I felt like I was drowning." "But you didn't drown. That's what matters." Elizabeth checked her pocket watch. "Thornton will take at least an hour to deliberate, possibly longer. You should eat something." But Malin couldn't eat, couldn't do anything but wait while her fate was decided by a judge who'd shown nothing of his thoughts throughout the entire proceeding. They reconvened 90 minutes later. The courtroom felt different now, tension thicker, stakes clearer. Judge Thornton took his seat, surveyed the room with an expression that might have been weariness or disgust, or both. "I've reviewed the evidence and testimony," he said. "This is a difficult case because it touches on the intersection of contract law, territorial jurisdiction, and basic human rights. Mr. Blackwood is correct that Miss Joe signed a legal contract. That contract was properly witnessed and filed. Under strict interpretation of territorial law, she violated its terms by fleeing." Malin felt her heart sink. "However," Thornton continued, "the law is not merely words on paper. It must serve justice, not simply enforce agreements made under conditions of unequal power and understanding. The evidence suggests that Miss Joe was deceived about the nature of her employment and subsequently subjected to conditions that amount to unlawful detention and sexual coercion." Victor's lawyers shifted uncomfortably. "The question before this court is whether a contract can be enforced when its execution violates federal statutes against involuntary servitude, regardless of how that contract was originally formed. My answer is no. A contract procured through fraud and enforced through abuse is void as a matter of public policy." Malin grabbed Ethan's hand, afraid to believe what she was hearing. "Therefore, I rule that the contract between Victor Hale and Malin Joe is null and void. Miss Joe is under no obligation to return to Mr. Hale's employment. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the Territorial Marshal for investigation into possible criminal charges related to human trafficking and unlawful imprisonment." The gavel came down. It was over. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters shouting questions, society ladies gasping in scandal, Victor on his feet protesting before his lawyers pulled him back down. But Malin heard none of it, felt nothing except the overwhelming wave of relief that nearly knocked her sideways. Free. She was free. Elizabeth was talking, explaining next steps, warning that Victor might appeal, but the words washed over Malin without sticking. All she could think was that the contract was void. The judge had ruled in her favor. She was no longer property. Ethan's hand squeezed hers. "We should get out of here before Victor decides to make a scene." They pushed through the crowd, ignoring questions shouted by reporters, making their way to the wagon. Behind them, Malin heard Victor's voice raised in anger, his lawyers trying to calm him, but it sounded distant, unimportant. It wasn't until they were clear of town, riding back toward the ranch with the setting sun painting everything gold, that Malin finally let herself cry. Not from fear or pain, but from the sheer overwhelming relief of freedom earned, fought for, won. "You okay?" Ethan asked. "I'm free," she said through tears. "I'm actually free." "Yeah, you are." They rode in silence after that, each processing in their own way what had just happened, what it meant, where they went from here. The ranch looked different when they arrived that night. Same buildings, same land, same mountains in the distance. But everything had changed because Malin was no longer a refugee hiding from pursuit. She was simply a person who'd chosen to be here. Over the next few weeks, life settled into new rhythms. Morrison's follow-up articles about the trial turned Malin into something of a celebrity, the Chinese woman who'd stood up to a powerful man and won. She hated the attention but appreciated what it represented: visibility, acknowledgement, proof that her story mattered. Victor filed an appeal but dropped it after 3 weeks when the Territorial Marshal's investigation uncovered enough evidence to charge him with multiple counts of unlawful imprisonment and sexual assault. He fled to California before arrest warrants could be served, his reputation in ruins, his business interests dissolved by partners eager to distance themselves from scandal. Elizabeth told Malin not to expect justice in the form of seeing Victor punished. Men like him rarely faced real consequences. But his exile was something, and the contract's nullification was everything. "What will you do now?" Elizabeth asked during her final visit to settle her legal fees. Stay here? Go somewhere else? Maylene looked around the kitchen where she'd learned to cook American food, where she'd sat across from Ethan during countless quiet meals, where she'd stopped being afraid. I don't know, she admitted. I haven't thought past being free. That's fair. You've earned time to figure things out. Elizabeth gathered her papers. But for what it's worth, you're welcome to stay in Wyoming. Territory needs more people willing to fight for what's right. After Elizabeth left, Maylene found Ethan in the barn, mending tack with the patient focus he brought to all physical work. You've been avoiding me, she said. He didn't deny it. Trying to give you space. Figure you need time to decide what you want without me hovering. What I want? You're free now, really free. You can go anywhere, do anything. Don't have to stay here out of gratitude or obligation. He set down the leather strap he'd been working on. I meant what I said before. You're not property. That includes not being obligated to me for helping you. Maylene stepped closer, making him look at her. What if I want to stay? Not because I'm obligated, but because I choose to. Why would you choose this? Life's hard out here, lonely, not much to offer someone who could have more somewhere else. You really don't see it, do you? She shook her head. Ethan, in the past 2 months, you've taught me more about freedom and dignity than I learned in my entire life before. You respected me when I had nothing to offer. You protected me when it cost you everything. You saw me as a person when the law said I was property. She reached for his hand. Why would I want to be anywhere else? He looked at their joined hands, something vulnerable and uncertain crossing his face. I'm not good at this. At feeling things. After Sarah died, I just shut down. Don't know if I can be what you need. I don't need you to be anything except yourself. The same man who handed me water instead of questions, who taught me to shoot, who stood between me and men with guns because it was right. Maylene squeezed his hand. I'm not asking for romance or promises, just partnership. 2 people helping each other survive and maybe, eventually, live. Ethan was quiet for a long time, processing this. Finally, he said, You sure? Because once you decide to stay, I'm going to get used to having you here. Going to be hard to let go after that. Then don't let go. He pulled her closer, wrapped his arms around her with the kind of careful tenderness that came from knowing how easily things could break. Maylene pressed her face against his chest, listened to his heartbeat, and felt something settle inside her that had been displaced since leaving China. Not quite home. Not yet, but the foundation of it. Spring came to Wyoming with its usual dramatic flair. Snow melting into mud, grass emerging green and defiant, wildflowers exploding across the grassland in riots of color. Maylene planted the garden in earnest, expanding it beyond vegetables to include flowers her mother had grown in China. She wrote letters regularly now, and her mother wrote back, hesitant at first but growing warmer with each exchange. The ranch began to thrive under their combined attention. Ethan's skill with horses and land management combined with Maylene's organizational abilities transformed the struggling operation into something sustainable. They hired seasonal help during busy periods, began selling horses to the army, built a reputation for fair dealing that brought steady business. They married in late summer, a simple ceremony at the ranch with Elizabeth and Sheriff Carson as witnesses. No big celebration, no society attendance, just 2 people promising to build a life together on their own terms. That night, lying beside Ethan in the darkness, Maylene thought about the girl who'd collapsed in the dirt believing she was dying. That girl would never have imagined this. Safety, partnership, the radical freedom of choosing her own path. You're thinking too loud, Ethan murmured, just remembering. The bad stuff? Some, but also the moment you offered me water instead of interrogation, when everything changed. He pulled her closer. For what it's worth, that changed things for me too. I'd been going through motions for 3 years, waiting to die. Then you showed up and gave me a reason to actually live again. We saved each other then. Yeah, guess we did. Outside, Wyoming stretched endlessly under stars that had witnessed countless human struggles and would witness countless more. But inside the small ranch house, 2 people who'd survived separate hells slept peacefully, their breathing synchronized, their futures uncertain but chosen. Maylene Joe had come to America believing freedom was something granted by others, signed for in contracts, earned through submission. She'd learned differently. Freedom was something you fought for, bled for, refused to surrender even when the law and power and money said you had no right to it. Freedom was standing in front of a judge and telling your truth regardless of consequences. Freedom was choosing love instead of safety. Freedom was learning to shoot bottles off fence posts and plant gardens and believe that tomorrow might be better than yesterday. Most importantly, freedom was waking up each morning and deciding who you would be, what you would fight for, how you would spend the precious time you'd been given. Maylene had found that freedom in the last place she'd expected, in the arms of a broken rancher who'd offered water to a stranger and ended up saving them both. The red silk dress she'd worn while running for her life was long gone, burned in the stove the winter after the trial. She didn't need it anymore, didn't need the reminder of what she'd escaped. The scars on her feet had faded to thin white lines, visible only if you knew to look for them. But the lessons stayed. The knowledge that she was stronger than fear, braver than she'd known, capable of surviving anything because she'd already survived the worst. And when her daughters were born, first one, then 2 years later another, Maylene taught them those lessons. Taught them that dignity was not something granted by others but claimed for yourself. That fear was natural but surrender was optional. That freedom meant choosing your own path even when the world said you had no right to choose. She told them about running through thornbush toward an uncertain future, about collapsing 50 yards from rescue, about the moment she decided dying free was better than living as property. She told them about their father, who'd offered protection without ownership, respect without expectation, partnership without possession. She told them about Elizabeth Mercer and Daniel Morrison and everyone who'd risked something to help a Chinese woman with nothing to offer in return except the truth. But mostly, she told them that they were free. Born free, raised free, entitled to every possibility the frontier offered to those brave enough to claim it. And at night, after the girls were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Maylene would stand on the porch and look out at the land that had become home. The same land where she'd collapsed believing her story was ending. Instead, it had been beginning. The beginning of everything that mattered.